of our Senate roundtables. This is a Hudson Valley roundtable, the first of 5 regional roundtables across the state to examine the component elements of the state's foundation aid formula for the funding of public schools. This effort is a statewide one. We will be also holding roundtables in Buffalo on Friday, Syracuse, Long Island, and Queens, and a public hearing in New York City on December 3rd. Our goal is to hear regional stakeholder input regarding the components of the foundation aid formula in relation to student, district, and community needs, with the goal of greater equity in school financing. We are joined by a number of our Senate colleagues and other elected officials, invited representatives of school districts and regional stakeholders, and school advocates throughout the Hudson Valley, esteemed members of the New York State Regents, and representatives of New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli's office. We are also joined by committee and central staff of the Senate, and I want to particularly thank the Education Committee Director, Georgia Asciuto, for her tremendous work in putting these roundtables together. By way of background, I won't talk too long, but this is important. In 2007 through 2008, the New York State Legislature adopted the foundation aid formula, which is codified in New York State Education Law, Section 3602. It was passed as a response to the decision of the New York Court of Appeals in Campaign for Fiscal Equity versus New York, which affirmed the right to a sound basic education under the New York State Constitution and established that the previous distribution of state aid constituted a violation of this right. The provisions of the formula, which we are discussing today, attempted to determine the needs of each particular school district with a complex set of factors. Good morning, Senator. Weighed together to determine the amount of foundation aid per pupil owed to each school district in the state. The original plan was for a 4-year phase-in of the formula, which was cut short by the Great Recession. Currently, $3.4 billion remains to be phased in for 398 school districts under the existing law. Today, we are focusing specifically on the factors used in the formula, with the goal to solicit up-to-date factors that more accurately reflect the changes in our state over the past 12 years and changes in particular districts with unique needs. So to that end, we will be discussing specific elements of the formula, not a generalized discussion of the issue of the state's funding of public schools. I do want that to be clear. This format will be as follows. We'll ask our fellow senators to give brief opening statements. Then we will ask every invited participant to give no more than a 1-minute introduction of themselves and their perspective on the existing provisions in the foundation aid formula. After all the participants have done so, we will be posing specific questions for discussion with the goal to hear from a variety of views about whether and how to improve the law to appropriately measure student need and move to a more equitable formula. We are also deeply interested in your views about factors of student need in your own district that may not be accurately represented in the formula, the impact of regional cost, and the impact of cuts in your district over the past several years. We appreciate the large audience of listeners here today and ask that comments be limited to invited participants. Of course, everyone is free to submit their comments to us at an email address, George's email, which I will give out, or to appear at the public hearing in Manhattan on December 3rd, or alternatively, to submit testimony at that time. On a personal note, as someone who lives in and represents Yonkers and knows its unique and long-term school funding challenges, I am so pleased we were able to have our first roundtable here, to have our school superintendent, school board president, Yonkers Council PTA president, and later our mayor here to participate. Of course, our majority leader and fellow Yonkers resident, Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, will be here as well. Together, all of us have fought long and hard for our Yonkers school students, and this roundtable will help us address some of the needs of our district that have long needed review. Thank you for your attendance here today, and I look forward to a productive session. I would like to hand this over to my co-chair in this effort, Senator Brian Benjamin.
Thank you, Shelley, and thank you for inviting me to Yonkers. It was really easy finding parking, so I want to thank you for that. But let me just say a couple of quick points. Number one, I strongly believe that our foundation aid formula needs serious analysis, primarily because it's so complicated. At least it's complicated to me, who is not an expert in education. And, I have some very clear concerns and questions around student poverty, how that's measured, how do you determine English language learners, et cetera. How does this formula actually function? As we talk about budget and revenues going forward, I know one of the main components of that, in terms of how we pay for education, is local property taxes. And so how the foundation formula, foundation aid formula is actually structured and functioning, and is it most consistent with the needs of 2019, 2020 versus the needs 20, 30, or 40 years before. And so I'm very interested in understanding this conversation better, and I'm glad that we have all the experts in the room so that we can get a better sense of where are the fairness issues that we need to address as it relates to this formula specifically, and what should we be doing as a legislature going into next year to make a real difference, to make sure that we are sort of doing the main thing, which is providing a basic, sound, and good education to all of our children across the state, regardless of their income, regardless of their racial, what their race, regardless of ethnicity, regardless of everything. We're giving our kids a great education. So how we do this is going to be important to that. So thank you, Shelley Mayer, for putting it together and for being a good chair of our education committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Senator Little, do you mind if I skip to Senator Krueger as the chair of the Finance Committee, since money is part of this deal?
Hi, my name is Liz Krueger. I'm the chair of the Finance Committee. Not only is education one of the largest drivers in the New York State budget, but there's not a senator or an assembly member in the state of New York who doesn't care about public education and what's going on with it. And probably there's not an assembly member or senator who doesn't think that their districts aren't getting a fair shake. So I thank my colleagues for hosting this event today, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Thank you.
So, Senator Little, why don't you go ahead?
Oh, thank you. I'm Betty Little, and I'm from upstate New York. My Senate district is the largest geographically in the state. I represent Warren, Washington, Essex, Clinton, and parts of St. Lawrence County and Franklin County. I represent 49 different school districts, ranging in size from very small to probably my largest is about 3,200, 3,400 students, K-12. But foundation aid is something that has been talked about, examined, looked at. There's always the fear there'll be winners and losers. And so to be looking at this now, I think is very important. And as was mentioned, one of the things that is affecting some of my schools is that if they applied for the community federal funding where they got free breakfast and lunch for all of their students, they are no longer collecting free and reduced lunch applications. And therefore their poverty level is not what it should be. And that certainly affects everyone. So I'm very interested in hearing from everyone. Thank you, and thanks for having this.
Thank you, Senator Little, as the ranking member of the Senate Education Committee. Do you have a mic? No.
Speak out loud.
Okay, you speak out loud, I think it's fine.
Well, good morning. I just want to thank everyone for being here. I'm Senator David Carlucci. First, I want to thank our chair, Shelley Mayer, and our leader, Andrea Stewart-Cousins, for taking the bull by the horns. Because we know we have a long, long journey ahead of us. It doesn't matter what district you look at, we have thousands of children being left behind every year. We have to be honest about it. We have to take this issue out from under the rug. We have to understand the complexities of it. And just like was said in the introduction, we know districts like Ossining. We know districts like East Ramapo, the ones that I represent. When enrollment increases, so should aid. When English language learners increase, when we know there's increase in poverty, that needs to be addressed. We know right now that the biggest safeguard we address, our chair of the finance, Senator Krueger, put it well in saying, this is a big part of the budget financially. Well, it affects every part of the budget if we don't get it right. I chair the mental health committee, and we see every day the repercussions of not having enough guidance counselors, of not having early intervention, of not having pre-K or even kindergarten as a safeguard. So I am thankful to each and every one of you who has dedicated their careers and really their lives to making sure that our children get the best education possible. And when I see what's happening around the country, we have to be leaders and show what's possible, and we can do it in New York State. But the foundation aid has to be dusted off, and it has to be dragged into the 21st century. In New York State, there's 19 million people. We represent every corner of the globe. Right here in the Hudson Valley, we have every culture. And we have to make sure we're meeting every child where they are, no matter what language they speak, no matter how much money their parents have. So I'm just honored to be working with our chair, Shelley Mayer, all these senators right here, all of you and all the parents. Together, we can continue this journey and make sure we get the job done and do it this legislative session. Thank you for being here, and look forward to working with you in partnership. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. I'm Senator Jen Metzger. I represent the 42nd Senate District, which is it's the most rural district in the Democratic Conference, although Senator Little's district definitely makes mine look tiny at 2,400 square miles. I touch 31 school districts. I represent all of Sullivan County, part of Delaware County in the Catskills region, and part of Ulster and Orange County in the Mid-Hudson region. Access to a good public education is fundamental to every child realizing their full potential. And it was fundamental to me growing up without resources to attend a good public school. And I very much understand it. I'm from Queens originally, and so understand sort of the urban needs. But I represent a largely rural district, and it has its own challenges. And I'm very pleased that I have superintendents here today that are coming from my district and can speak to those challenges. But we have some specific issues are, looking at the role of property and income in the foundation aid formula. I have districts that are considered wealthy in the formula, but are actually not at all wealthy. They have their high needs populations, so there's a real disconnect there, and that's particularly true, I think, for rural communities in my district. We also face the challenges of declining enrollment in almost all of the districts in my school district. And there are fixed costs to education. And when you have school districts that span in excess of 100 square miles, it's difficult to talk about consolidation. You can't have your kids riding buses for hours. So there are real challenges there. I really am so appreciative to Senator Mayer and Senator Benjamin for organizing this hearing. This is really one of the most important issues. It's also one of the most complex issues, and I appreciate hearing from all of you today. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Robert Jackson, and I represent 13 miles of Manhattan, from Marble Hill in Washington Heights, going all the way down to Chelsea area. I chair the Cities Committee, but I am on the Education Committee. I'm on the New York City Education Committee with John Liu, and on higher education. And I was the lead plaintiff in a campaign for fiscal equity lawsuit, where we sued the state of New York because they were cheating our children out of billions of dollars. And so I'm here in order to listen to what you have to say. And many of you, I've listened to you, a short version for your 5 or 10 minutes that you had in the budget hearing, but this is an opportunity for stakeholders to come together to really discuss it. What I'm expecting to come out of these roundtables is additional documentation of the needs for each one of your geographical areas. And last year, I went around the state of New York with the Alliance for Quality Education to Rochester, Syracuse, and Schenectady, and Brentwood, Long Island, and Peekskill, and Ellenville, and I got to see firsthand myself what the situation was, and I heard from individuals. And I say to you, Shelley, Brian, this is a good roundtable, and I expect that the results are going to be what we all know, that our children are being deprived of the opportunity for a sound basic education in which they're entitled to under the law. And all of you should know, there's the same attorney that filed a lawsuit in '93, Michael Lavelle, filed another lawsuit in February 2014, going after the $4 billion all of our children are entitled to. 5.5 years ago, still not resolved. It's a damn shame. Thank you.
So, one of the wonderful things that Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins did as our leader is to create a subcommittee on New York City schools, which really deserved its own committee. And Senator John Liu is the chair, and I'm so pleased he's here.
Thank you, Senator Mayor, and thanks to you and Senator Benjamin for co-chairing this very important roundtable. Bottom line, folks, we need money. We need more money. More money. And that is what Senator Benjamin, as chair of our Budget and Revenues Committee, has been doing. He's been racking his brains, concocting new formulas for generating revenue, shaking every tree, even trying to grow money on trees, and looking under every known mattress in the state of New York. Thank you, Chairman Benjamin, for trying to get us more money, and of course, our education champion, somebody who's always reminding us we need more foundation aid. We need more foundation aid, not only because there's a court order that's telling us we have to give more foundation aid, but the children really do need it to get a sound basic education. And that's what we're here for. We're trying to identify new ways to fund education in this state. It is by far the largest expenditure that we make every single year. Every local government as well as the state government as a whole. Always the biggest budget item. So we need more money, and we also have to figure out if there's a better way to more equitably allocate that money. That's what we're doing here today. And Senator Mayor and Senator Benjamin are taking us around the state to other places as well, so that by the end of this year, when we start the session in January, we will have fresh ideas to fully fund our education and finally give our school kids what they deserve. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I join my colleagues in welcoming everyone to the roundtable, and I want to thank Senator Shelley Mayer, who I've known from the assembly days that we were both a part of, and has really been a breath of fresh air as the chair of the Education Committee. And in working with her co-chair today, Senator Benjamin, I think this is an enormous undertaking, but one that is long overdue. And I'm thrilled that hopefully we're going to be able to tackle this, at least in part, if not in whole, come next legislative session. I think there's universal appreciation that the formula is broken, or at a minimum inadequate. And if there is a single data point that demonstrates that, it's that you have school districts, some school districts that still have not received even 50%, half of the foundation aid that they're obligated to receive, versus some school districts that have received over 100% of the foundation aid that they deserve to receive. And so there is a very clear discrepancy in how districts are handled in the current foundation aid formula. And whether it's the regional cost index, which I firmly believe the Hudson Valley is really treated unfairly with that RCI multiplier. There's no reason why we shouldn't be treated the same, at least the same as Long Island, which has a similar cost of living. In a number of the districts I represent, there is a significant and growing non-public school population, and the current formula simply does not adequately take into consideration the impact of these non-public school costs on the public school districts. Special ed costs are rising and outpacing what we're giving districts in foundation aid. Tax certiorieries are commonplace in the Hudson Valley and around the state. They can have a crippling effect. And so the formula is broken. And while that's a universal acknowledgement, there is not a universal acknowledgement about how to fix it. And so to listen from the stakeholders here, I think, is crucial for us. on this side of the table, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, James. Hi, everybody. My name is Pete Harcum. I represent the 40th District, which is parts of northern Westchester, parts of Putnam, parts of Dutchess. Glad to see several of my colleagues here from the school sector, education sector. Not a lot more to be said than what all of my colleagues have said. Clearly, I just back up and say I represent suburban schools, I represent urban schools, and I represent rural schools. And every one of them has unique fiscal challenges and are not served by the current formula. So I think there's universal understanding that the formula is broken. On the other hand, many of our districts are taxed out in a property tax environment when homeowners have lost their state and local deductions because of the federal tax changes. So property tax is no longer a sustainable way to fund our schools. So we've got some great challenges, and I'm just so grateful to both Shelley and Brian for convening these task forces. It's important that we get this right, and we've got an opportunity to, and I'm so grateful that all of you are here, and I look forward to a really robust discussion. Thank you.
Let's move right to our distinguished regions.
I love this moving speaker thing.
I know. How about the round table is a square table?
Discuss that. Good morning. I'm Bev Odeker. It's my 5th year as a member of the Board of Regents. I'm crowning 60 years in education, having started as a kindergarten teacher in 1961. So the old crackly voice is because it's talked a lot. I think I share a lot of thoughts and feelings and frustrations with this group of people, and I'm thrilled to death that you pulled this group together, because I hope we can more than nudge what's been happening. I could talk forever, but there are lots of us who yet speak, so thank you for including me. And I'm going to be at least 2 more of these around the state.
Hi, good morning. I'm Nan Mead. I co-chair our state aid efforts with Region Odeker. And I'm also thrilled, Shelley, that you've been able to pull this group together. And, Region Odeker and I have been doing a lot of listening in the last couple of years since we became co-chairs. And some faces look familiar, some do not. And so I think what is great is that we will continue to listen. And so thank you for being here.
But we talk sometimes.
There's another mic, though. We can move them. You don't need to use the word. Sorry.
I'm Frank Schnecker. I represent the Ossining School Board. I'm also on the board of Putnam Northern Westchester BOCES, and I'm the executive committee of Westchester Putnam School Boards Association. So today I'm here representing Ossining, although I'm also talking to a wider group. Ossining is one of a small number of districts in the state that has seen a substantial enrollment increase, like Yonkers, since Foundation Aid was frozen. That has a very detrimental effect on the services we can offer students with significant need. I'm here today to listen and to absorb, and also to represent those voices. And whatever formula that we look at, we need to make sure we don't erase the clock of the last 10 years, because there's been harm done. While we have a hold harmless provision in New York, we also have districts that have been harmed. And so I look forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Tom Corby of Portchester School Board. Also a lifelong educator, 40 years in the Portchester district, and now 6 years on the school board. So I've given my entire life to education, educating children. It is my sincere belief that unless and until the formula changes, districts like Portchester, Ossining, and a few others, probably Peekskill and Yonkers, the gap between the marginalized students and those that are not as marginalized will continue to grow. We have 800 new students into Portchester since 2009, 10 years, at a cost without any state aid of $15 million. When I got to Portchester in 1971, there were 14,500 people in the village, and now when the census comes out in 2020, the educated people who understand what's going on, the village employees and the services that are being provided, believe that we're somewhere in the 30 to 35,000 residents. So, and without any additional state aid and the frozen state aid, we are in difficulty. We just floated 2 years ago a $80 million bond with 24 new classrooms. None of it was for roofs or boilers or for doors or windows. It was just for rooms, and there's not one person in the village of Port Chester on the construction end or here in the educational end that says when our bond is completed in a year and a half from now, will those 24 rooms at the rate we're going will be enough? Where are we going to go? Are we going to go to the taxpayers and ask them for another $80 million? There'll be the entire new board that will be elected in the school board because the constituents, friends and enemies of all of us on the board want answers, and they're very, very upset. So I'm hoping to be a part of the solution and not of the problem. So Senator Meyer, please do not lose my phone number because we want to, I know you won't, but she has an office in Port Chester. So I know that she and I will continue to work together with the rest of your distinguished people in the Senate. But we're here for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just would say we've been joined by two of our Assembly colleagues, Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff and Assemblyman Steve Otis, and we welcome them here. We're just going around and having everyone briefly introduce themselves. So we'll get back in the circle to you, okay? Okay, go ahead.
Senator Mayor, all the senators and assembly men and women who are here, on behalf of Brandon McDonald from our Board of Education and myself, David Mauricio, Superintendent of the Peekskill City School District, I'd like to thank you for organizing this important conversation. And a little bit about Peekskill. It's a city that is experiencing a renaissance, like many of the cities on the Rivertown cities. But with that renaissance, there still are families that are struggling financially. There are children struggling academically, and we're receiving a large number of new students. Since July, we've received 282 students, 85 of whom are high school students. Some of those students are in the 18, 17 age range. And so with that comes some challenges and some needs. We welcome every child that comes, as you all do. We welcome them into our community. Of the students that we have received, 36% are immigrants. 10% are students with disabilities, and 2% are homeless. And so that's important for us to consider that, because it creates a very important need for us and also a challenge in educating them. But again, we do welcome them. 80% of our current population, our students, are students who are receiving free and reduced lunch program, and that's an important factor for us as well. 21% of our student population are English language learners. 17% are students with disabilities, which is about 6% higher than the national norm. We know our kids can achieve if provided with the proper supports. And one of the things that, and I'll close with this and talk a little bit about it later, but one of the tough choices we've had to make, and so I'll give you a quick analogy. I have a son in college and a daughter who will be entering pre-K. And so with that range, I could never, as a father, make a decision to deny my daughter money for her education, nor my son. But as a superintendent, I'm making decisions about what I provide to that 18-year-old immigrant student who just enrolled this year and has interrupted formal education. Or do I create a new pre-K class for children in our district, over 100 who don't have access to pre-K? That's a tough decision to make. Our students with disabilities, our English language learners, the census is a concern, so we're getting the word out so that they all vote, because many of our immigrant families are afraid to vote or to be counted in that census. So very important for us. What I'll share, and I'll close with this, 2 points, is that we require that $11 million gap in foundation aid. Our kids deserve it, and they require it. And so that's important for us. What 2 things? One is we want our access to the pie. And our kids deserve every ounce of that slice. However, I don't want to take $1 from Ossining or Yonkers or Greenburgh or Pleasantville. What we need is a bigger pie. And so with that, I thank you everyone for this conversation.
Good morning. I am Ken Hamilton, Superintendent of Mount Vernon. And I want to thank thank you for this opportunity and for bringing this subject to light. I want to start by saying I'm kind of tired of begging for money. As a superintendent of one of the neediest districts in the state, I am constantly walking around with my hat in my hand, asking the state to provide opportunities for the 8,000 students that we represent. Mount Vernon is owed some $20 million in aid, and we have been begging for it for the last 9 years. 100% of our students are eligible for free and reduced lunch. 18% of our students are classified. 10% of our students are homeless, and 40% of our population are transient. Imagine these challenges to provide our students with appropriate opportunities that make them competitive in the world in which we live, while we are simultaneously trying to stabilize our district. The average age of our buildings is 80 years old. So we have a very delicate waltz that we're trying to dance by providing services to our students and understanding the edict from our community that they are overtaxed. And it's time for the state to take responsibility for that. And we should not, as leaders, and I'm sure all of my colleagues will be able to talk about the uniqueness of their districts and advocate for funding. But at the end of the day, we should not be put in a position where we even have to have this conversation. The state needs to fulfill its obligation to support the educational programs that will make our students competitive. As we look at what we are trying to do in Mount Vernon, as many of my colleagues are, we are simply trying to make sure that our students get what they are entitled to. And while I will continue to advocate for our district and for our students, our taxpayers are also tired of hearing the same song and dance, and little action is being taken. So I appreciate this opportunity and hope that at the conclusion of this roundtable or others, that you will also see the dire need that we have for the state to make good on the foundation formula.
Good morning, and thank you to the senators for being here today and for giving us this opportunity. I'm Cheryl Champ, superintendent of the Pelham Schools, right next door to Mount Vernon. And this morning, as we look at our foundation aid, we are one of the many districts in southern Westchester that is funded at only 51%. For us, that's a net of about $3 million short of what should be coming into the district. That, of course, for many districts, us included, has forced an increased reliance on our reserves to maintain program in light of this underfunding. For the last 2 years, as I've been superintendent in the district, we've had to close generally about a $1.5 million budget gap in order to stay within the limits of the cap. So the only way, as we know, since 80 to 85% of our budgets are based on personnel, is reduction in personnel, and that eventually has reduction in program. So I have significant concern about the convolutedness and opaqueness of the structure of the formula. New York is a very unique state, and I know that there was intent to address that diversity of our state in that way, but the formula as it is not working, and that it's not keeping pace with changes in our districts. Pelham, over many decades, has shown an increase in enrollment, and we have not adjusted, the formula has not adjusted for that. We've also had an increase in free and reduced lunch. Even though we are considered a high wealth district, we are experiencing more diversity in our socioeconomic enrollment. Finally, I would say we do not receive the benefit of what we believe to be a reasonable cost index factor, as we are grouped in with Putnam, but living literally a stone's throw from the Bronx. The cost of living and the cost of doing business in Pelham is very much akin to New York City and Long Island. As a group of school superintendents, I think it's fair to say that we are all committed to equity. We understand that there's a fairness and equity that needs to be provided, and this formula is not delivering on that for most of us. And I would just put in one final urge to you as senators: please don't get distracted by the funding transparency efforts that are now occurring at the federal and state level. Though they are likely very well intended, it's chasing the wrong thing. It's a shiny distraction that will point the finger back to us as superintendents and how we manage our resources at the district level, instead of tackling this foundation issue, which is a much more difficult, much more complex system. Thank you so much for your time.
Hello, everybody, and thank you, Shelley and the legislature for taking on this challenge. I know it's a difficult one. My name is Samantha Rosado Ciriello, and I'm the president of the Yonkers Federation of Teachers. We represent roughly 1,900 union members, teachers, teaching assistants, support staff in the district of around 27,000 students. Our district experiences lots of challenges as a result of the lack of funding to the formula, and while we can take a look at what needs to change in the formula, until the formula is actually fully funded, I'm not sure what changes will alleviate the issues that we face. I've been an elementary teacher in Yonkers since 1995. I've taught kindergarten, 4th and 5th grade. I'm also the parent of an autistic 5th grader, and so I understand the challenges of special needs. I understand elementary. I'm also Latina, and I understand the challenges that we face in a minority community as well. We have an obligation to educate our students to the fullest. They are our future, and our responsibility is to give them their best chance. The way to do that is to provide adequate the resources that we need, the appropriate resources that we need in order to provide them that education. Our students, we have in Yonkers a 1 to 2,000 ratio, roughly, of social workers to students, okay? 1 social worker for every 2,000 students. When we talk about the social emotional needs that our students have, how can we actually meet those challenges? We talk about safety, school safety, #1 priority. We don't even have enough security officers to man the buildings. We're pulling school aides and teachers from their classrooms to sit at the front doors of school buildings. That's not okay. We need to address those challenges. We have 1 psychologist for every 900 students. We don't even have librarians in every building when we talk about 21st century skills. How do you meet that without appropriate number of staffing to meet those challenges? Technology. We need to put technology into our schools to give them their best chance. So when we take guidance counselors, 1 to 800 students. We don't even have guidance counselors in every school. So we need to fully fund the formula. We are calling for a 3-year phase-in, okay? The state has a $3.4 billion deficit of funding the formula, right? We are $4 billion owed to school districts across the state. If you phase in over 3 years, that's $1.1 billion. In Yonkers, we're owed $38 million. Phase in over 3 years, $12.6 million per year. So yes, I agree with the colleagues around the table that the formula needs to change, absolutely. But if we can't even find a way to fund the current formula, changing it isn't going to make a difference.
So, can I just add that I appreciate and know the passion of Samantha and all my colleagues. Let's be very focused on what today's opportunity is, which is to address, notwithstanding our funding shortfalls, which we as a group have been extremely aware of and have put our game. Today's focus is to try to collectively get ideas about improving the way we distribute the money. We are not taking away from the conversation of needing more money. We know we will all fight for more money. But I do want to keep us focused because this is the first opportunity we have had as a group collectively with stakeholders to hear what doesn't work in the complication. So I appreciate the passion and I share the passion, but we also need to focus on what we have the opportunity to address here. I just want to acknowledge that.
I appreciate that, Senator. We can't lose sight of reality, though.
Yeah, understood. So we'll keep going. Yeah, it's off now.
Thank you. I want to thank both of you, Senator Mayer and Senator Benjamin, for giving us the opportunity, but also for including Samantha and myself as teachers. It's really important to be part of that conversation, so we really appreciate that. While we're going to get into the weeds about the formula, it is really important to acknowledge that the formula does need to be fully funded. White Plains is currently owed $11 million, and our students do deserve that money, and until we see what that looks like, that needs to actualize. We can have that conversation about changing the formula and making those modifications, and this is a great place to do that, but we really need to advocate and make sure that we get those funds. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Joseph Rick. I'm the superintendent of schools of White Plains. Senator Mayer, Senator Benjamin, thank you. Thank you to all the senators and assembly folks in the regions. This is a complex issue. And the fact that we're having this conversation today and that you're willing to travel the state to have this conversation is extraordinarily heartening to me. You know, both as a teacher and as a father. We know that education is the driving force in the budget in the state of New York, as it should be, because the future of the great state of New York rests on the successes in our schools. And, you know, I tell you, on behalf of our Board of Education and our over 7,000 children in White Plains, it's a great opportunity today to start talking about problem solving and recognizing that if a formula is too complex to understand, there's probably a problem with it. And recognizing that we cannot enter into a conversation where it's a zero-sum game and there are winners and there are losers. None of our children, no matter where they are, as far north as we go, as far south as we go, should lose. And I think, you know, everyone in this room, I think, is well-intentioned. No, I know it. I know everyone in this room wants to see every single child in the state of New York have the best opportunity that they can have to succeed in our schools. As we move forward, I think we absolutely must focus on the fact that our needs have changed, and the needs of children have changed. And I know you know that. And we need to reapply our funding and our resources in a manner that's consistent with today's needs. Now, I'm a realist. We're talking about dollars and cents. We're talking about the ability to raise those dollars and move forward. But I think, as Senator Liu mentioned before, there are some creative ways, new ways, bold ways, and courageous ways that we could start having those conversations. And I applaud you for being here and being willing to take that on. Thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Tahira Dupree Chase, and I'm the proud superintendent of Greenburgh Central School District. And I thank each and every one of you for hosting this courageous discussion today on the needs of our students. We in this state, I would even say in this country, follow the philosophy of antiquated models, and we're providing for children who are going to represent us in the future. I represent a school district of a little bit less than 2,000 students. I have a 17% special needs rate. I have about 23% of my students who are second language learners. My enrollment is growing. We're busting at the seams. Just recently, I had to close my early childhood program because the ceilings were falling. I can't have 4-year-olds in a space where the ceilings are falling. I have 2 buildings in my school district that are in disrepair. They're in disrepair. Every few weeks, there's a water main break, there's a pipe bursting. We're doing abatements. All the superintendents around the table have heard these stories over and over. There are tiles. There are students who can't stand close to certain areas because we're afraid that they would get injured. No child should have to be educated in conditions like that. In your own homes, if you have issues or there are broken items in the homes, you will get it fixed. Well, my students spend the majority of their waking hours in our schools. I am obligated, and my community expects that I provide the best opportunities for my students to learn and for my teachers to teach. And because of this antiquated formula, it makes it that much more challenging, not just for Greenburgh Central School District, but for all the districts in the state of New York. I am encouraged by the opportunity to be here, and I am hoping that I can walk away with some semblance of hope that I can take back to my district. Hope that there's going to be movement in changing the formula. I want to speak briefly about the formula for Greenburgh Central School District as it relates to build and aid. Yep, I am one school district where we get 10% build and aid. That means I have the hardest chance of doing any sort of construction or any sort of building. My buildings are over 100 years old. We have not done construction in well over 25 years. My district was never able to pass a bond. Quite recently, I asked my community, can you afford to do something with our schools? And they told me no. We've outtaxed our community. We need help. I cannot continue to sustain children being in a building in disrepair. This is an urgent matter. Again, I thank you for allowing us this opportunity to speak about our challenges. And I'm hoping that we can all walk away with hope that I can bring back to my community.
Morning. I'm Mary Dubitsky from the Eastchester PTA Council. Thank you so much for hosting us and having us. Eastchester has spent the last 10 years receiving less than 50% of the foundation aid, and we've had almost 10% enrollment growth. We feel that the foundation aid formula does not adequately address enrollment growth. We also agree that it relies on outdated data, especially in terms of the regional cost index, and that the goal of achieving greater equity and overall distribution is sabotaged by the hold harmless provision. Schools are being asked to support more than they were when the formula was originally created. There's new security concerns, social emotional learning that's really important, and many unfunded state mandates that the schools have cost the districts. The makeup of communities are changing, and the formula should be reviewed frequently because of these changing expectations. So I thank you for having this today.
Hi, good morning. I'm Lisa Sanfilippo. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Business of Eastchester Schools. And as Mary Dubitsky just mentioned, we are one of those districts that receive 48% of the foundation aid formula. So from my perspective, I'm not ready to say yet that there's something wrong with this formula. I don't know that there's something wrong with this formula because it's never been funded. I feel that if I got my $8.2 million that the foundation aid formula generates on behalf of Eastchester, I think we'd be pretty good. That's my dilemma here is that, I think it's the formula on top of the formula that determines how it actually gets funded that may be the problem here that we need to look at. It has to do with the hold harmless agreement. To that extent, I know we're talking about $3.4 billion in underfunding. If you strip out those that are being overfunded, it's a $3.7 billion underfunding. So I think while nobody wants a zero-sum game here, and I get that, nobody wants to take from anybody else, the reality is that there's $300 million going out the door to school districts in excess of the foundation aid formula. And again, everybody wants more, and I get that, and I'm not saying we take from that, but it's a reality that we have to look at. If there's a limited pot of money, we do have to look at who's getting it and look at the schools that are, how is it that they're generating more funding than what the foundation aid formula entitles them to. There's the state shares formula as well as determines how it gets funded. So I think it's great that we're looking at this, and I think it's worth talking about. But at the end of the day, I don't know that any of us can say that the foundation aid formula is no good because we've never fully executed it and funded it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Karen Melange. I am the Executive Director of the Westchester Putnam School Boards Association. And in fact, I'm also here on behalf of the Lower Hudson Education Coalition, which comprises the 4 counties of Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, and Dutchess. The
the school board members and the superintendents in those 4 counties. I think what I'd like to get across today is a little bit of a description of the changing face of the student body in the lower Hudson Valley, in the Hudson Valley area. And I think you'll find that it has changed a great deal over the past decade since the Foundation Aid formula was instituted. We actually find in Westchester certainly that our enrollment is actually stable. It is not declining, but many of our districts are actually facing increasing enrollment. Although there are some that are declining, the increase in enrollment, especially in the lower part of Westchester, as you've heard, and will continue to hear today, it constitutes a significant issue for us. We also find there's rising poverty levels and increasing student needs. The 4-county region that which we represent 77 school districts within that region, now has a student body that is majority minority. Poverty rates have climbed over, I think it's an 8-year period, from about 30% of those students to 38% of those students. That this is a significantly different student body than what the suburbs used to look like. Certainly a decade ago, and definitely more than a decade ago. When it comes to the Foundation Aid formula, we do feel that the cost factors in the formula suffer from the use of outdated data, cost factors based on old studies. The regional cost index is based on 2006 data. The regents have proposed a study to update the costs of ELLs and students with disabilities from the current 2003 data. Census data from 2000 is still being used in the formula. New York City and Long Island can certainly expect every year a certain proportion of the Foundation Aid total. The Hudson Valley counties have to deal with the volatility in our shares of formula. The circuit breakers in the formula, such as in the wealth index, limit the range of funding. The regional cost indices that include large swaths of the state that have very dissimilar labor markets. The building aid formula uses a different different cost index that is done on a county by county basis and is updated every year. If you look at that, you will see that the lower Hudson Valley counties actually have, in some cases, Westchester County currently has actually a higher cost index in the building aid formula than what Nassau and Suffolk County do. We feel that there's inadequate measures of pupil needs, including measuring poverty through the easy but inaccurate free and reduced price lunch. There are significant additional needs in our area for the needs for things like school security, for student mental health. These were never really envisioned in the original Foundation Aid formula. And of course, as it was earlier brought up, the impact of non-public school costs on public school districts, again, was a piece that was never really incorporated in the original thing. On the other side of the fence is what we've been finding with our districts, the ability to tax, the ability to come up with your contribution factor has been significantly constrained over the past decade. The tax levy cap limits property tax increases. The lack of the SALT deduction has had a disproportionate impact on high property tax regions such as Westchester County. It's reduced the net income of our taxpayers. The wealth index is based on property wealth and income. Incomes with which people actually pay their property taxes have grown much more slowly than property values. So it's essentially assuming ability to pay on the basis of your property wealth is no longer as accurate as it might have been at one point. In essence, we feel that our districts also need more tools to help them to fund public education. We need mandate relief, perhaps in the form of having the state smooth out some of the outsized budgetary impacts of changes in pension or healthcare costs, or one suggestion that comes up. But I think we're finding that most of the public education districts are essentially funded through state aid and through property taxes. There have been significant issues, obviously, as you've heard, with the funding of the Foundation Aid formula. There are also significant issues in terms of the ability to tax and the ability of local property owners to come up with the additional funding as well. So yes, I agree, courage and a little bit of innovation here hopefully will help to turn the day. But I really appreciate being asked to speak today on behalf of those 77 school districts.
just let you know that we do have a series of questions we want to open up that address many of the issues you've raised here today, so we don't have to address them all in the opening, we will get to these specific issues. Otherwise, yeah, I had a 1 minute preference.
So I'm Ray Sanchez, Superintendent of the Ossining School District. So I'm Ray Sanchez, Superintendent of the Ossining School District. I'm also President of the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents. And I want to thank you for organizing this session and the sessions that you're seeking to organize across the state. I'll just start off with basically what the Foundation Aid formula was intended to do, and I'm hoping that part of this discussion and our goals remain on what the Foundation Aid formula was providing, which was, number one, equity and driving dollars to some of our neediest districts. 2, predictability, which is something that we've struggled with. I know from Ossining, but I know all my colleagues struggle with predictability. 1 year, Foundation Aid and your state aid could be at X number, and the following year it could be at a different, and there's no rhyme or reason when you pose the question as to why you got what you received. And the other part of it is that we use data that's very clear, concise, and predictable, and that we all understand. I'm not sure everyone at the table fully understands the measures that are being used as it relates to the Foundation Aid formula, and I think we should come to a conclusion and work towards reaching each of those goals. I'll just share from a perspective of Ossining, and much like we said before, we've seen increases in enrollment. Our combined wealth ratio has gone from a 1.6 to a 1.059 in that 10-year span. That's significant, and we're still not viewed as a high-need district. These things need to be considered as we continue this conversation, and I'm hopeful that during this dialogue, that we can also continue to discuss the shares, which leads about 50% of our state aid in education reaching 2 regions of our state. It makes it more complex when we think about the Foundation Aid formula and still trying to address this new regulation or legislation regarding the shares and the per pupil that each of the district is receiving related to Foundation Aid. You have districts with high needs that are receiving about $2,400, while other districts are receiving about $4,000 through Foundation Aid. I'm happy to talk about more of that in the time that we have here together.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Tracy Hitchin-Boyd, Assistant Controller with the State Controller's Office, and I'm here with Elliot Auerbach, our new Deputy Controller for Government and State and School District Accountability. I will cede most of my time to Elliot, but I want folks to know that we were invited here. Thank you to the senators for asking us to join you, to hear firsthand about the struggles that the education community is facing with respect to Foundation Aid. Our office has a variety of roles with respect to local governments and schools that can be helpful for you to be aware of. Particularly, we gather a lot of data on property taxes, on local economies. We do a lot of research in those areas that hopefully can be informative to you as you go about your work today.
Good morning. I'm Elliot Auerbach. I'm the Deputy Controller for Local Government and School Accountability. I've been in that role for about 6 months. I first want to thank the Senator for inviting me here. She has really put me to the test of learning about Foundation Aid in a compressed 1-week time. I will say that I come from small government. I was the mayor of a small community. I feel the pain of funding when it comes to each and every one of you. I also feel the pain of the challenges that you're all facing as educators, because I happen to live with a high school guidance counselor who continually tells me the challenges of providing the services to the students in her school. I will say to the superintendent of White Plains, I appreciate the fact that you are equally as confused as I am about looking at the formulas. I consider myself to be somewhat astute, and I'm still scratching my head over what I see as a challenge in understanding how the dollars and cents flow. I will say, though, that education and education funding has been a top priority of Controller DiNapoli, as you all know. In 2016, the Controller actually released a report on school funding. And at that time, he recognized the inadequacies of the foundation funding and the indices that were used to determine that funding. And I feel like here we are 4 years later from when that report was released, talking about the same issues. So Tracy and I are here today to hear, to listen to the problems, and hopefully help you find the solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Mayer, and all of the senators for inviting us here today. I'm John Evans. I'm the shared superintendent between the Roscoe, Livingston Manor, and Downsville school districts. All three are represented by Senator Metzger. And I'm very happy to say that the comptroller's office is confused by the formula, because I am as well. I represent 3 small rural school districts. I'm shared between the 3 of them. We encompass about 400 square miles and service a little over 900 students. My 3 districts are very different. According to the combined wealth ratio, one of the things looked at by the formula, 2 of them are extremely wealthy. The state average is 1. So if you're a combined wealth ratio of 1, higher than 1, you're wealthy. Lower than 1, you're considered a poor school district. So in Downsville, I was happy to hear somebody else has a 10% building aid ratio. My combined wealth ratio is 2.5, yet 64% of my students qualify for free and reduced lunch. All 3 of my school districts qualify for free breakfast and lunch for all students because our direct certification rates are over 40% in all 3. Roscoe services just over 250 kids. My combined wealth ratio is 1.4, yet 52% of my students receive free and reduced lunch. Downsville, or Livingston Manor, you can have 3 school districts, you get confused on which ones are which, is my poor district with a 0.9 combined wealth ratio, and 57% of my students receive free and reduced lunch. So according to the state formula, I'm overfunded by the foundation aid formula in 2 of those districts. Yet in small rural communities, we don't have access to healthcare, doctors, dentists, basic services that are readily available in more populated areas. So the cost of servicing our students with all of these different things increases significantly. So while, according to the formula, I'm overfunded, I would, like the comptroller's office to help me find where, because I sure as heck can't find it. So I appreciate this opportunity to, for you guys to listen to all of us and to hear the challenges that we face trying to decipher a very complex formula that hasn't been run and doesn't work. So thank you.
Good morning. I'm Emily Rubin Persons, Board Trustee in Board of Education Trustee in Pleasantville. Thank you for this opportunity to speak and to listen. There are a few critical components that many of us know. We've already said, some have already been said, but of course we need to publicly repeat them in the hope that these revisions and changes can be implemented. Our governor has not been committed to this formula, and the formula has never been allowed to fully run, as we've all just said. One thing to consider is to get rid of the 1998 shares agreement, which divvies up New York City and Long Island with set percentages and leaves the rest of us to figure out what we'll get. Second, the formula needs to have up-to-date figures, as some of us have already said today. It's running on 2000, 2003, 2006 numbers. There's been too much movement in all of our districts with too many different types of students. Just the Ossining and Long Beach City, 2 school districts are examples and proof that the formula is not working. Since joining the board in 2012, there's one phrase that seems like a broken record, which is unfunded mandates. Many of these mandates are put into place for good reason, but
For example, the mental health education that we have on our plates today. But there's been no cost analysis. So how can we operate these? They make for great sound bites to the people of New York, but the districts are shamed when we can't fund them properly. We don't have the resources. So these programs are based on theory, but they're unsustainable unless there's a commitment to having those resources. So will the Senate make a commitment to proper cost analysis before a new mandate is voted in to assure that the program is feasible? We're sandwiched between the tax cap and the mandates. We can't control our expenses, and we can't control our revenue. We can't even control the extra funds that we may have in our district due to the very strict laws. So if we have a little extra money in our cafeteria fund, we can only use it for food. We're not even allowed to use it, I think, for the air conditioning in the cafeteria. So what flexibility can be placed to ensure that we can efficiently operate our districts and we don't have to cut quality program? Westchester County has 5.6% of the total public school students in the state. We contribute 11% of the total income to the state of New York, yet we only receive 3% back in state aid. So the shares agreement, to what I said earlier, has to end because we're not receiving back what we deserve. And each school district is unique, which is why we need the flexibility. We're often, Westchester is reported as having the highest tax bracket in the country, along with the highest cost of labor and materials, as well as high salaries, which is again why we need to have our regional cost index needs to change. I am. So, in summary, we need a cost analysis of the mandates, we need flexibility on the mandates, and we need a commitment to using current data. And this all does relate to the foundation aid, because this is all about funding our general education for our students. Thank you very much.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Good morning. All right, I am Mary Cox-Alter, proud and passionate superintendent of schools in Pleasantville, New York. And I have 4 simple C's that will address our situation here. First of all, we have to give a big shout out to Senator Jackson because the foundation aid formula was a remarkable public education policy document. Remarkable. It just wasn't given a chance to live, period. All right? The 4 C's in terms of looking at this. First of all, and the reason why it wasn't given a chance to live. C number 1, it is compromised by the current shares formula that automatically sends 50% of the money someplace else out of this region. It is confused by the so many tiers A through J, and I can get into the reads with you over those. And then a predetermined amount of money set by other people and backed into it. That's why we have a colleague here who is overfunded by the formula, but in dramatic poverty. It is crippled by an inaccurate measure of regional cost index. Enough said, better people said it better than I. And it also has a PNI, a pupil needs index, that has a totally inaccurate measure of poverty, a totally inaccurate measure of English language learners, and a complete miscalculation of our students with disabilities that is over 20 years old. It does not rate the increase in mental health. It does not rate the level of kids with needs on the autistic spectrum. It does not measure up to safety and security needs right now. And it is conflicted by something called the AFA, it's called the Adjusted Foundation Aid Amount Calculation, for the expected, I underline the word expected, local contribution that uses an average to figure out the medium. So listen, if you win the New York State Lottery, please do not move to Pleasantville because you will totally screw up my combined wealth ratio. Okay? And it is also then conflicted and not adjusted for the expected crushing local property tax burden of SALT-D, tax certs, and a cap on what we can raise locally. So I'm going to end it with a very positive C. Let's all renew our constitutional commitment to public education here in the state of New York. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and who decided to sit Ms. Fox behind Because I was very concerned about all this unhappy conversations taking place here. So I was going to inform you all that there are 30 children in the center of the room, and that this conversation is about children. Don't ever forget that. So good morning, Senator Mayor, Senator Benjamin. Thank you for your courage. Thank you, Senator Kruger, for being here, and all distinguished members of the Senate. I'm Edwin Quesada, the superintendent of the best urban school district in America. That will be Yonkers. This is a district that is moving and doing extremely well, and I'm extremely proud of that. The Foundation Aid formula, its accuracy and balance have been constant source of struggle for us in the city of Yonkers. In its current form, it fails to recognize the prevailing needs of Yonkers students. Think of the following. 80% of Yonkers students are students of color. The vast majority of students are economically disadvantaged. Many of our students are immigrating from countries impacted by political upheaval and economic challenges. 20% of our students' population are students with disabilities, and another 20% are multilingual learners. Can an algorithm account for these major challenges? The answer is no. Since the formula was introduced, Yonkers has received an additional $51 million in foundation aid. In 12 years, that makes a 4.25 average increase. Can we actually survive? I think my electricity and my oil actually goes up more than $4 million every single year. The current formula uses poverty value, income levels, outdated census data to determine appropriation. These elements truly negatively impact Yonkers. If we are to fix the formula, let us begin by addressing the needs of students. I urge the senators to push for a formula that looks at underserved, unrepresented urban communities and guarantees the following. Fully fund the formula. Pre-K for all funded by formula appropriation. The formula should not allow for wealth, poverty, and property values to be the driving forces behind the formula, but rather, what do students need? Make specific provision for students with disabilities and multilingual learners. The formula should allow for a review of the city's ability to raise revenue and make provisions for cities who are facing fiscal distress. Make specific provision for community-eligible districts in the absence of sufficient income data from our parents. Increase appropriation for Korean technical education, and ensure that our 7th through 12th grade students are receiving funding for CTE. Appropriate significant funding for our community schools, which is something that is working very well in our community school. Please remember that the Foundation Aid formula is only a tool, and as such, it is only applicable to the workings of equity when it is in the hands of leaders who are champions of equity. You are those leaders. And allow me to finish with something controversial. Let us not allow this conversation to result in the wrong definition of equity. It is not about giving everyone the same, but it is about giving students what they need. So what my friends in Pleasantville needs is not exactly what my friends here in Yonkers actually need. Let us truly redefine equity by making sure that the formula is taken into account that. Thank you very much.
Good evening, and thank you, Senators, for being here today. My name is, I get two mics. My name is Steve Lopez, and I almost said whatever he said, but I'm president of the Yonkers Board of Education. Thank you, and welcome to our fantastic city. I'm going to keep it brief, Senator Mayor, because that's what you asked for. I'm going to stay to the salient points, which is what you asked for. We all heard about calculations, regional cost indexes, poverty measures, populations. We know what the issues are and what needs to be fixed. You've heard it time and time and time again. Property wealth is not indicative. We have, most of our poverty children are located within 4 zip codes, and it's not accurately measured. The poverty issues here, but economically, that's 20,000 kids. 20,000 kids in Yonkers, and yet because we're in Westchester County, we're considered to be part of the high wealth issue. This stark disparity doesn't address the issue. The formula, real simple, I was talking to Senator Jackson earlier, the formula needs to be dynamic instead of static. It needs to provide some indices. It needs to be dynamic. It needs to be reviewed on a regular basis. You can't wait 20 years to get it done. And it needs to account for the ever-changing socio-economic indicators within the cities themselves based on their individual issues. CTE is another thing. We know CTE is fantastic and it does great. But starting CTE off at what, 9th grade, 10th grade, when you got to start them off at 7th grade, so from 7 to 10 you're on your own. That needs to be looked at as well. I mean, CTE is an issue. I mean, pre-K, I mean, we get funded at $12.1 million. It costs us 20. So now that the grant's over, and you say, okay, you continue to pre-K, we're having to fund the additional $8.1 million. So those are things that need to be looked at. Once again, I'll keep it short, and thank you very much for your time.
Good morning, Senator Shelley, Mayor, and Benjamin, and Senators Benjamin and delegates. I'm Rob Rios, President of Yonkers Council of PTA. I represent a little bit over 40 schools in our district for the local PTA units. We are the voice of the parents within those schools. We've year after year gone to Albany to advocate for the correct funding and the funding formula, because the Yonkers district alone, it's every single year underfunded, and we're short between $40 and $60 million every single year. The impact of that has been over the past few years of hundreds of teachers being laid off, and the ratios that you've heard about. One guidance counselor for every 800, one psychologist for every 885. There's only 180 days in the school year. How are we providing the services that we need to our students and our parents? Last week, I had our regular council PTA meeting in School of Instructions. I had parents telling me a psychologist is going from, a guidance counselor going from one school to another half-time because she needs to fulfill the requirement and try to provide services across the school. So it's a real need, it's a real impact. I had 3 children in the Yonkers School District. We've been an advocate for the longest time. We do need to fund the formula equitably, but we also need to take a look at the poverty rate that exists and the factors that affect that formula for our district. Thank you again. I appreciate that you've taken the time to do this.
Good morning. My name is Walter Sorry. My name is Walter Paci, Assistant Superintendent for Finance for the East Ramapo Central School District. I proudly represent a district with 9,500 students in public schools and 27,500 students in private schools. Our district is unique. As previous speakers shared, we face many challenges. I just would like to share with you that in the last 4 months, we have received 820 students, 200 students, more than 200 high schoolers, the rest in the grades K to 8. That means in a net, we just added another school. And all this with the confines of the Foundation Aid formula, which funds our district for roughly 60%. What does it mean? We received $37.8 million. We should receive another 24.6 based on the remaining unfunded mandate. That clearly indicates the issue, and that's probably the easiest one. What does not work for East Ramapo School District? The main thing, obviously, is the combined wealth ratio. Combined wealth ratio is 1.19. 1 is the average. Our district, with 83% free and reduced lunch, has a ratio of 1.19, which is upper middle income, which is completely not reflective of what the district needs are. And that is because the Foundation Aid formula considers the wealth and the income of the entire district, and then spreads it out only to public students. We have 37,000 students in one way or another with mandated services. However, when the Foundation Aid formula works, considers our district as a 9,500 students, which is only the public side, and that means we look wealthy. What else does not work in the Foundation Aid formula for the East Ramapo Central School District? It's an outdated, the Pupil Need Index. It's an index that is totally outdated. They use, it's my understanding, I cannot claim that I have checked, but they use 2000 US government census data. That is completely outdated. If I just look at the other night, at the poverty level for children between 5 and 17 years old in our district, it is 37% It was 29% in year 2000. It's 37% now. And it's hardly you can find another district with that poverty level. You can go around. Newark, New Jersey was 30%. New York City is at 24%. These are the closest estimates of that. So that formula, if you're using, at least you just use the latest data. So I can talk more, but these are the main issues.
Good morning. My name is Lisa Wiles, and I'm the superintendent of the Ellenville School District, which is located in southern Ulster County. So a lot of my statistics you can find in the AQE report, You from the Classroom. And I really want to first start thanking all the senators for being here this morning and today. So I had a huge reluctance in coming today. I've been the superintendent in Ellenville for 15 years. I've been in public education for 23. And honestly, I have advocated and gone to meetings like this, visited my senators for many years and assembly people. And I'm really frustrated because my children in Ellenville deserve what all the students in New York State deserve. And my reluctance in coming today is we do an awful lot of talking about this. And I still don't have my Foundation Aid formula. That Foundation Aid formula was created in 2008 as a result of a federal court case that really denoted what the inequities were. And it was never funded. So I agree. I don't know if this formula works or doesn't work because it was really never let to run, okay? That being said, I also agree about the definition of equity. It's not the same for all of our children, and it's changed in the last 15 years. Our children, our enrollments decreased, but the needs in this state have increased. My colleagues say it. You all know it from what you're hearing back in your communities, from your constituents. And we need to change and be courageous. And I'm hoping, and I was reluctant to come here because I have a pile of work to do at home. And was the cost of coming here worth the benefit of coming here? And I hope these conversations are starting where we're going to see some fruitful outcomes from this, because I'm tired of talking about this. I would suggest that we fully fund the foundation formula, kind of the way you did the gap elimination adjustment. We knew we were getting it, we knew it was coming back, and it was done over a period of time with a commitment that something was going to happen. We need tangibles, and we also need sustainability. There will be another recession. Hopefully I'll be retired by the time that happens. Hopefully. But honestly, we have to be able to sustain these programs for our kids. It is not fair about the zip code. It's not fair what year you're born in, whether there's a crash or not. We need a system that sustains, these opportunities for our children. This formula, I'm going to go back. So for full disclosure, Mr. Auerbach's wife is one of my guidance counselors. So it's a little worrisome to have a comptroller in your district, but whatever. I'm just saying. But I am humbled that he does not understand the formula. I have a math background, and I don't understand the formula. And you know what? We can laugh about it, but every one of us in this room should be able to go in front of our taxpayers and our constituents and say, this is what the formula is. We expect our teachers to do that in a math class. Our taxpayers should expect us to do that in our communities. It has to be understandable. There should not be this, we don't really know what it is. Someone's manipulating something. There's a formula on top of a formula. It's like rearranging the deck furniture on the Titanic. It's ridiculous, and it needs to be fixed. I don't know all the components of what it is, but we need to fix it. So it's not understandable. I can tell you, poverty is deafening. It is the equalizer in all of our districts. Poverty is, and our kids are coming, many of our kids are coming with less opportunity to the door, whether it's before pre-K or kindergarten, and we need to equalize that. There needs to be a focus on special ed. 21% of my students are students with disabilities and needs. We have kids with psychiatric issues in elementary schools. This is emerging. I just can go on and on. I'm not going to. I know time is tight. But this formula, I think it should run. I think it should be restored. And I just have to say one other thing, and then I'm going to give this to Kevin. All the taxpayers in my community got a tax cap refund check, right? If your district stayed within the tax cap, which so many of us have to because no one's going to override the vote, they got this really nice check back, right? Which is nice. And they say, oh, look what the state is doing. I got money back this year. Maybe we have to have discussions about that tax cap refund check. And maybe that's a source of income to put back into the foundation formula. It just seems like we're moving things around and money's coming from different areas. Let's have some priorities on a formula and let it run and not have all these extra little gifts that come in the mail. Let's just do what we need to do.
I just again want to add that I understand the source of frustration that's voiced in this room, and we knew that would happen when we had this group that has had so many challenges. We accept that, and it's our obligation to listen to it. This is an opportunity to do something positive. I think you have the commitment of the people here today, and my assembly colleagues who will get a chance to speak, to examine and to try to make change. So I urge us to move into this with a positive mindset. There are things we can accomplish, there are things we can't accomplish. Those of us elected people know that we are going to give our heart and soul to try to make improvements. So I just would urge that you channel your frustration and years of resentment, which we hear very loud, into a positive force, because this is an opportunity to move forward, and please let's use it that way.
Okay, as my kids always tell me, I picked the wrong lane at the toll booth. I think I did that today. Oh, you don't have easy pass, you. Anyway, Kevin Castle, superintendent of Wallkill Schools. I've been a superintendent and an assistant superintendent for business for 15 years, and in the same district. So I have a little history when it comes to Foundation Aid. In fact, I had a lesson plan to teach all of you about Foundation Aid, but since I have a minute, I'm going to scrap that. But prior to Foundation Aid, I think we need to, first, for the record, there is no Foundation Aid anymore. It's addendums to the Foundation Aid. And in fact, that's really the issue at hand, is the addendums to the Foundation Aid. Prior to Foundation Aid, I'm just going to give you a quick history within a minute. We had 8 categories such as class size reduction aid, enrollment adjustment aid, limited English proficiency aid. We had sound basic education aid, and we also had a big category of tax limitation aid, and we had a big one which was called flex aid. Those categories went away when Foundation Aid came into place. So when Foundation Aid came into place, those who wealth measures were relatively low, which ours are compared to the state, and I'll share those charts with you in the end, so at least you have those as a perspective. Our district benefited greatly. In fact, when we went from Flex Aid to Foundation Aid, we received a 12% increase in state aid. And that was because of our wealth measures. And I have heard around the tables that we may not want to look at that anymore, but I don't want the unintended consequence where we do throw that out. One reason I state this is our gap in regards to wealth measure is still the same as it was when Foundation Aid came into place, meaning and the gap is we're much lower than the state average. Yet, due to the addendums, we are now put in the same category as wealthy school districts whose wealth measures exceed those state averages, the same gap that ours are well below that. So I ask that when you look at this as a whole, do not just have a knee-jerk reaction in regards to how you're going to adjust this. Because while throwing out the wealth measures, and I understand my colleagues whose combined wealth ratio is much higher, ours is 0.69. Yet we're in the same category now as districts whose combined wealth ratio is 4. That's problematic, and that would support Senator Metzger's claim that there are districts that are considered wealthy in the formula, but in reality they are not. So again, I ask that be mindful. I wish I had the groundbreaking formula for you. I was a math teacher, but that's going to be your role. But I ask that you do continue to take our advice, and I do appreciate you having this for us.
Thank you. Can I take a moment of executive privilege and jump over you, if you mind?
Sure.
I'm Mayor Mike Spano, who joined us. Thank you, Member City Council President Mike Cater. So Mayor Spano, maybe you want a minute, but we're going around very brief, so-called brief, to sort of the underlying issue of foundation aid for your district, which you have a lot of Yonkers here, and then we're going to open it up for a more thorough collective conversation about how to address the problems in the formula. So if you'd like to go.
Well, you know what, I'll just continue,
Okay,
give me a
all right.
second, I just left the debate.
You left the debate, okay.
You
Let you rest.
so
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Senators Meyer, thank you very much. Senator Benjamin, Home Senator, Senator Skoufis, thank you. Regent Mead and Odekerk, thank you very much. Marlboro is a very unique situation, similar to everybody around the table. Senator Benjamin asked the question, it was the right question, is the formula consistent with the needs of 1920 school year? No. No, it's not. Marlboro has a bifurcated perspective of state aid. If you're coming north up the Hudson River, Newburgh Beacon Bridge, just north of the Newburgh Beacon Bridge, you see 2 power plants on the west coast of the Hudson River. Those are in Marlboro School District. In 2012, both of those plants, experienced a major economic tragedy that resulted in Marlboro School District seeing a reduced taxable assessed value of about $450 million. That was transferred immediately for the next 2 school years to the taxpayers, because you still have to pay your taxes, with 2 years of 15% increases in our taxes. Incredible. So I'm looking at it from a bifurcated perspective. The property wealth in Marlboro dropped by $450 million. We've also seen a dramatic increase over the last 9 years in our economically disadvantaged. So actual household wealth has dropped. We're at 39% in our free and reduced rate. The foundation aid formula is supposed to capture that. It's supposed to do a catch-up, especially when it comes to the property value loss. In the period of 2012 to 2016, I'm told it's a 2-year catch-up period. So 2012 to 2016, there's a total of a $200,000 increase in our foundation aid. If you look at the AQE formula, according to NSBA calculations, we're short by $5.4 million. That's a 59% funding rate. So the formula does not work. It doesn't. I'd love to be part of the conversation, continued after today, to figure out how does our unique bifurcated perspective and issue, which is a real issue, help us. So thank you very much.
Good morning. Thank you, Senators, Assembly members, for being here today. I'm going to lean in because it's a little crazy. My name is Aki Ansari. I'm the Advocacy Director for the Alliance for Quality Education. But I started with AQE as a parent leader. And one of those parent leaders that was going up to Albany to actually fight for CFE before it actually was implemented, and as well as the C4E titles and items that were put into place, right? Managed to graduate 8 children out of New York City Public School as of last year. And I'm here to say that we just put out a report that has been acknowledged a few times. And if you want to know about impact, all you got to do is go to AQE's website. We have all about the impact of statewide. Foundation aid in name only. New York State denying the full worth of Black and brown students, right? And that's what we're really talking about here. So real quick, I want to read this, because I think it is the crust of what we're hearing, but it's something that a lot of people don't know, and I don't think we can say it too many times, which is one. Since 2011, the state has never once used the foundation aid formula. Instead, every year since 2012, that's 7 years ago, the governor and the legislature have substituted temporary formulas in the state budget for the foundation aid formula. Temporary budget. It has not been what the intent was, right? In order to create the illusion that they are still funding foundation aid, they label this new funding as foundation aid in the school aid runs, the state's official annual accounting of school aid, but it is foundation aid in name only. I want to say that again. It is foundation aid in name only. We've had enough of intent, right? The intent, I don't believe anybody's intent is to harm children. But at the end of the day, after 14 years, almost 14 years of the decision being made, it really doesn't matter what intent is if the impact and how it's landing on children are all the things that you've heard today that continue to happen and that have increased even more because of the environment that we're in, that we are receiving more students with special needs, that we are receiving more of our immigrant populations from all around the country, right? In this moment right now, what we need to acknowledge is that we have not used the foundation aid formula since 2011. So how do we know that it doesn't work? What shows me, what I see right now, what the track record shows me is we have a formula, we haven't funded it, we changed the formula. Why would we fund it? There's nothing telling me, there's no proof that this is going to move forward or change. And it has not, and at the end of the day, I get it. We need more money. And so Senator Lou and Senator Benjamin, I know a bunch of mattresses of millionaires and billionaires who crashed our market in the first place, who have more money than they did before, who we can overturn. But what we need that to look like is that even though it's an election year, that we have to be looking at those mattresses, right? And so if we haven't used the foundation formula and we haven't funded it, again, how do we know that it doesn't work? And that is really the question that we need to really address. And I would just say this too in closing, this time that we're having, this is not conducive to parents and community members to be able to participate, even if they can't be on it, to be able to listen to it, right? Because at the end of the day, what comes out of here, how does it get translated and how are we capturing those conversations too? So thank you.
Well, I would just like to thank the senators for having this kind of conversation. This isn't a conversation that has occurred many times. I'm in the New York State Assembly, and I hope that we can join you in this effort in some coordinated hearings as we go forward. And those would be available to the public to be able to. Well, sometimes coming to Albany is not really being available to the public, but we do have a lot of meetings there. But I want to thank you so much. And, every year we've been putting more money into the foundation aid, but people are so right. It gets tinkered with. And I like the conversation about the dynamic numbers, because the numbers change, enrollment changes. I have Ossining and Peekskill in my district with a huge increase in enrollment. I have some schools that have had a decrease in enrollment. We have to reflect upon that. We also need to look at when plants go out of existence. I've got Hen Hut School District with the Indian Point nuclear plant going out, losing at least 33% of their tax base right then when it closes. And to have a period of time when there's not assistance, and that's something that we have to deal with. But if you have a dynamic formula that really is taking into account every year, then those things would be addressed. So I just have to tell you, in the Assembly, we agonize every year. Steve Otis is there. We spend so much time on this issue of foundation aid. Let's get it corrected, and it may be that we just need to follow, as you said, the foundation aid formula without the changes, go back to where it was, and have dynamic information as a part of that formula. So I'm here to listen. Thank you very much.
Do I need a microphone? Yeah, take a microphone.
Thank you so much, Senators, and Senator Mayer and Senator Benjamin, for holding this. And I know many of you from the education community have been working on these issues for a long time. For the last few years, I've made a project of mine in the Assembly, with the great support of Speaker Hastie and Sandy Galiff and our colleagues, to focus in on school districts that are at the low end of what they're supposed to get in foundation aid and try and get those numbers up. It is an expensive proposition in that to get, we had a 51% case mentioned earlier, the difference statewide in the budget to get all the districts that are below 50% to 50 to 55%, let's just say, is a ballpark like $20 million in a given year. To get all the districts that are below 60% to 60%, it's like $120 million a year. So the financial challenges of full funding or even getting people up to speed, that's coming from the same pie that we're all talking about. We need more money to fund all the needs around the state. That's the number one piece. The number two thing that a number of you spoke about was the accuracy of the measures that are used in the formula. This is a very frustrating thing because when you fix one, you're probably moving money around, and people don't like, you don't want to be the district that loses because some accuracy measure got improved. The other thing is that districts are struggling with the tax cap. Districts are struggling with all these other needs. It is a challenging situation. We need more money to hit those measures. So how are we going to do that? We're going to do that by coming up with additional revenues, giving you more flexibility, but the capping that is essentially what happens, we've had with the foundation aid not being fully funded. Before there was foundation aid, we had another form of that in the school aid formula. When we just had the school aid formula, we had something called the transition aid cap. The transition aid cap was another way of saying if the formula ran fully, in the old formula, you didn't get your full money. That hurt Rochester, that hurt Suffolk County, that hurt districts in Westchester. We have to make sure that our higher needs districts are not capped in any way so they get the full advantage of what they need to provide for their students. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you, and thank you, Shelley, Mayor, our Senator, and certainly the Chair of the Education Committee, to the Senators that are all here. Assemblywoman, Jill, where are you over there? Sandy, good to see you, and good morning, everyone. God, I feel like, I don't know where to start. You know, I did 20 years in the legislature, so I know how hard it is to get Albany to move. At the same time, I'm now spending my 8th year as mayor of the city of Yonkers. I have a different perspective. My perspective now is a local perspective of the reality, harsh reality of having to live within the confines of what Albany sends us. And while our delegation is very, very generous in terms of their time and their effort and what they deliver to the city, it's still a district that needs a tremendous amount of work. I mean, Steve Otis spoke about the transition aid. I remember the transition aid when I first got elected in 1992, and I think that year the transition aid was $71 million hit to the taxpayers of the city of Yonkers. You think about that. That's the way it was described to me was if the state, which is just fairy tale, is what I'm told, right? If the state were to put all that money into schools, you guys would get $71 million. And I look at it and go, no. The state is obviously putting a number into the formula, and they're leaving some districts out to dry under that scenario. Now, we've changed that. But remember, we go back to 9/11, and we had the bottom fly of the economy. And we had to make, and I was there, we had to make some pretty significant cuts to education. The district took a real whack that year. But remember the term hold harmless. And so, you know, cities like my city, a city that was growing in population, a city that was that needed to build more schools, needed to deal with an increasing population, we were held harmless, and other upstate cities like ours were losing populations, and they were held harmless. So what was the effect? Well, the effect clearly was their aid per pupil went up because they lost population, and our aid per pupil went down because our population went up. So, listen, more than 70% of our kids live at or below the rate of poverty. We all know that that, you know, dealing with our kids' education, the number one issue for our kids is poverty. It's not English proficiencies, it's not anything. It's poverty first. It's the only way we can get them to move forward, is to give them a good education, but they're living in poverty. And my problem is that we are in a high-cost area, and I think maybe could say the same thing. We're in this high-cost area. So if you go to Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, yeah, they're in a low-cost area, but we're in a high-cost area. And the cost of living is such that the dollars dry up very rapidly. And because the dollars dry up rapidly, well, who takes it on the chin? Well, our kids. I got 40 schools in Yonkers. I have $2 billion in infrastructure needs. I have $600 million worth of needs just to bring the schools up to what we would call the safe state standards, right? 600 million. And so, yeah, this formula, we know this formula stinks, and we know we need to change it. And I know that it's about dollars, and I know, and I'm not trying to put our legislators on the spot, because trust me, I was there, and I've dealt with the same issues while they were there, and it's not easy, because we are all fighting for the same pot of gold here. But to go back to what the superintendent over here was saying before, we just, maybe it's a good place to start. Let's fully fund the foundation formula, because we're losing $42 million just on that. That's our deficit. So if New York just funded the formula as they wrote it, that would certainly go a long ways to helping us. There's other things we can do to try and you know, put us at a different cost of living area and all that. I know that we're not in the same cost of living index as, let's say, we're living in Westchester, but there's a cost of living index, and please correct me, that is New York City, Long Island. Westchester is with Onondaga County? I mean, I don't get it, but, you know, that's something that should be addressed and should be dealt with. I'm so happy that Senator Shelley has brought all the distinguished legislators here, because I'm sure you don't want to hear the browbeating, but at the same time, you're willing to be here and help us come up with a solution. We want to educate our kids. We have issues that are very different. It's funny. It's not that New York State is different. The outcome's the same. The outcome is we don't have enough money to give our kids the education they deserve. Upstate, they don't have enough money to give their kids the education they deserve. But it's for two different reasons. We are costing us out of sight here, and we need some help and support. And these caps and these hold harmlesses and everything else that seems to get dumped on us is very, very difficult for us to deal with. You know, we're dealing with right now on the municipal side, because Yonkers, I have the luxury of having to fund both the education side and the municipal side. But, you know, we raised the age, which was a wonderful thing, and I thought that was the right thing for the governor to do. But it came with no dollars, several $1 million of course of changing that jail, putting additional staff in. Some of the changes that the Board of Education had to do, frankly, millions. Well, where did it all come from? I had to take it back out of the schools or take it back out of the municipal side. You know, I know people talk about unfunded mandates and they gloss over it, nobody wants to hear about them, but there was one that we all agreed with, but it was a mandate on the localities that did not come back to us, and we needed those dollars. So, again, we hear me browbeat you guys, but you are certainly a great group, and I'm glad to see that you're all there. I know that the future is brighter with this group in office. With no respect, of course.
So just 1 minute of housekeeping. One is we were going to break for lunch or a break at around 12:30. I sort of think it's an opportune moment now that everyone's got everything out, and now we're going to move towards trying to answer some questions that are specific. Secondly, Senator Stewart-Cousins is going to come around, so I think she certainly wants an opportunity to speak. So if it's okay with you, can we take about a 15-minute break? Is that collectively okay? And come back at around 12:15, and start with a very concrete effort to address what things, given the temperature we've heard, what things we can sort of start to question.
Banana.
I know we've lost a few people. I guess there was too much passion in the room. But no, I think it was a very productive morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Senator Jackson. So we're joined by our leader, Senator Andrea Stewart-Cousins, who's, really given us the authority, really, to move ahead in an aggressive way on these issues. And we're incredibly grateful for her leadership, not only for many of the things we did, but on this issue, as she and I were just speaking, allowing the Senate to become a substantial player in the education space. We have great respect for our Regents colleagues who are here, and we're so appreciative, and for the Controller's Office, and for those of you on the ground. But we clearly want our voice to be heard as representatives of our district. So that's through her leadership that we were able to move ahead with these roundtables and hearings. So without further ado, here's our leader, my friend, Andrea Stewart.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you so much, Senator Mayer. When we were trying to figure out our path forward, when we took the leadership, I said one of the great things that I get a chance to do is to name different people to different chairmanships. And so you see here, just an amazing array of leadership, but I particularly do want to thank Senator Mayer for chairing the Education Committee, because we're here as a result of, some of the issues that have been part of our state conversation for a very, very long time. And of course, Senator Lieu, because New York City is kind of, its own situation. I would never call it a beast. But I asked Senator Lieu to also take on New York City so that, all of the issues are addressed with the type of attention that it's required. And Senator Benjamin here is a guy with a lot of different finance background, and I've asked him to take a look at revenue, because, this conversation is important, but unless we can figure out ways to pay for things and look at best practices, it's just a conversation. So there was never a revenue committee in the Senate until now. And so that is certainly what Senator Lieu is going to do. And Senator Betty Little, who she and I have been forever, when I came into the state government, Senator Little was the chair of local government. She has a passion for local government and education and so on. So we've, changed roles back and forth, but she's steadfast in terms of her desire and ability to get it right, no matter which side of the aisle. And so I certainly appreciate you being here with us. And she comes all the way from like the farthest reaches. So she traveled. North Country. North Country for real. So thank you, Senator Little. And Senator Krueger, who is chairing our Finance Committee again, because, the dollars, that's kind of the bottom line. And Senator Krueger has been, again, in different roles around finance. Here she was the ranker before she was the chair. But she's also responsible for recruiting me back into the Senate. So, so I have a great deal of respect, but relentless in her pursuit of the money and following it. And Senator Jen Metzger, brand new to our conference, but just outstanding attorney, and again a little farther north than we are. With the issues of rural education and how to make sure that, you know, we are, again, not relegating kids to miseducation or no education because of their zip code or where they are, or if they're too far out for broadband and so on. So Jen is a real champion, and thank you too for traveling so far. And of course, my good friend, Assemblywoman Sandy Gallup, who needs no introduction in this context because Sandy is another one who has tried to figure out how we can pay for the things we need, how to alleviate some of the, especially in places like this, you know, the high taxes, and how we can, you know, make sure that we're fiscally responsible while allowing you all around the table to do the very important job that you do. I too want to thank the Regents for traveling, you know, and being part of this, because we have an incredible group of Regents, and you know, there was a time where it was like, okay, you were nice, so you get to do this job. I know nobody knows that ever happened, but there was a time. But we are now, and you know, because of the activism and because of so many things that happened, you know, we are all, you know, so pleased that in addition to the outstanding members who remained on the board, we were able to, again, attract even more, you know, folks who are, you know, really focused on education, because that's what we need. So thank you, and I know our controller's office is here. Well, with my controller. There you go. Thank you. Thank you for being here. So anyway, I just did all of this. I got everything. Oh, Pete. Oh no. All right. You know, because I got to do this, right? So my no, Pete. No, first of all, he represents the district where my grandkids go. So I have to be nice to Pete as well. But he's another person that comes with a wealth of experience, government experience, and you know, he's new to our conference, but certainly not new to the issues that are impacting all of us. And he's doing, you know, amazing work with the opioids. He's having hearings all around because, you know, I mean, all of these things are so interconnected. So really, thank you so much, Pete, for taking the leadership role in that in so many areas. And Steve Otis, of course. So the Assembly never really happened. It used to be the Assembly had all the people, and the Senate were like, you know. But now we've changed that, and we've got all these senators and two.
Robert Jackson.
Oh, RJ.
It's so crowded up here.
You all know Arjun. You know Robert Jackson actually walked from New York City to Albany about education. Okay.
Twice.
Yeah, twice. Thank you, Senator Jackson. Thank you
for your leadership.
Thank you. And then I was Dave Carlucci. Yeah, Senator Carlucci, who represents this little Ossining, but Rockland County. And thank you so much, working very hard with developmentally disabled and making sure that, again, everybody gets the education that they should have to achieve. I see James Scoopus, he does investigations, so everybody please, don't get Senator Scoopus investigating you. Because he is relentless. And Steve Otis, Steve, again, I knew when he was the assistant to Susie Oppenheimer, Senator Susie Oppenheimer. So there's very few people in the Assembly who have more understanding of how both houses work and how both houses can work successfully together. So thank you, Steve, for being here. So we're here because, you know, this issue can't wait. And yet, you know, our leadership has been incredible. It's been historic in so many ways. And there are obviously a lot of things that we still have to do. But I will say that there has never been as far as I'm concerned, a Senate conference that is so focused on getting education, funding, making sure that we are absolutely the best we can be. there has never been a conference that's been more focused on this issue. And the reason why we are doing exactly what we're doing, and we thank you, the Superintendent Gazada, this is, you know, our home turf, this is my district, and I know the mayor is here as well. But I thank you for hosting this because, you know, I think everybody knows Yonkers and the struggles and the, you know, different things that have gone on over the year. And because we're a big, small city, you know, I think people watch it and, you know, kind of scratch their heads. But it really is, I think in many ways, emblematic of a lot of the different things that people are facing in their school districts. And we could not see how to fix it, and we all want to make sure that people have the resources they need, the teachers and, you know, all the great, you know, superintendents and everybody has the resources, but unless we kind of start taking this thing apart, we will not be able to fix it. So these hearings all around the state is about that. It's about listening, trying to fix what we can fix quickly, and work on the things that we know are going to take some time to work on, and then, you know, also developing strategies for making the changes that we need to make. Because the thing about education up and down state is that if you do one tweak here, then there's obviously a ripple effect everywhere. And so, and nobody wants to have less than what they have. You know, there's certain school districts that are growing and certain school districts that aren't, but it's not a winning argument saying I'm taking something away from you to give to somebody else. And so we still have a finite pot, and as far as we're concerned, an infinite need to get education right. So hopefully, you know, I think you have seen, you know, our commitment and additional money and so on and the attention that we're giving, but I'm asking all of you, and I know all of you are, you know, to be partners in the transformation that will really create the successful lives that we know each and every child can have. It's not going to happen overnight, and I'm sure everybody knows that. I know there's a lot of, I heard this morning, there was a lot of conversation, people bringing a lot of stuff to the table. We want to hear it, but we also want to, you know, manage expectations and you know, help you to realize that it's not all going to change overnight. If we can do, you know, a few things right away that would alleviate some of the stress and make sure we're going in the right direction, that if we could do big things, you know, right away too, that would be great. But I think realistically, we are starting at an important point, and I'm so happy that each and every one of you, I see the teachers union, everybody is at the table. So I will get out of here, I'm not going to get out of here, but I will receive the mic and just thank all of you for being patient and stalwarts, and more than that, champions for quality education for every single kid in the state. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Madam Leader. So I'm going to start with a question. And honestly, I probably, none of my colleagues have the least experience when it comes to understanding the Foundation aid formula. But I'm pleased to have heard that a number of you experts also have some issues understanding the Foundation aid formula. So let me ask what I think is a natural next question for me, which is, if you don't understand the Foundation aid formula, how do you think about school budgeting? How do you do your planning for your budgeting? And then the question for me tied to that is, I've heard a couple things. I've heard increases in enrollment numbers. I've heard issues around ELL. I heard all these different things. What of those things are not accurately represented in the formula? For those who are into that, I have a separate question later on about any revenue ideas you have. But that's, I'm sorry, I'm going to stay focused on this. Any thoughts on that would be very good. Joseph?
Thanks, Senator. I think first and foremost, many of us probably project in terms of our budgeting. Do you hear me?
I want to give you a mic.
Okay.
There's a mic over there.
Thanks. Thank you. Always happy to talk about a budget. I think what many of us, or at least I do, is we project flat in terms of our state support net. It's unfortunate because we're supposed to be able to predict increases based on what the formula has promised. In terms of the data that are being used to drive the formula, at best they're outdated. And I think some of the folks around the table had mentioned this earlier, which poses a real problem when we start looking at AQ's latest update in terms of, or AQ rather, the apportionment of the monies that are associated with kids all throughout the state. We have at least a $10,000 gap, I think, between the funding gap that exists. So the data set itself is really outdated.
Anyone else have a comment on that? Oh, go ahead.
I'd like to add.
Samantha.
Samantha Rosado Cerrillo, YFT president. I'd like to add to that, and it is outdated, specifically students with disabilities statewide has seen an increase of 14%. Students in poverty statewide, an increase of 15%, and English language learners, 18%. That needs to be taken into account when determining funding.
Senator, it is not useful for predicting. So in its current state, it's not something that really, it's terminus on April 1st, as long as there's a passed budget. For long-term planning, we do 5-year long-term planning, fiscal planning all the time, and the state aid element of that is nebulous after year 1. So no, it's not useful for predicting purposes at all.
You know, notwithstanding that, when it was first, when foundation aid first came about, there was some predictability to it, where there was a minimum of 3% increase. So if we're going to look at, in essence, creating a new formula, which was done already. I mean, you got to go back. I brought all categories. I mentioned all the 8 categories back in 06, and then we went from flex aid to foundation aid. We need to go back in history of time to see what we do then to make that change. And I heard senators say it best. You got to dissect it. You got to take it apart. It's not just foundation aid. It's also private excess cost aid, which is aid we receive for out-of-district tuition for special ed kids. I mean, we have more students in private setting since 09. If we compare that to 09-10, that we're receiving 10,000 less in aid on that. So, and the costs clearly have gone up since then. So you got to look at all the different aid categories. You got to look at a big part is where are you getting the revenue from? I mean, look at, I'm a realist, and I've always told the Senator Bonasek and Larkin I met with all the time for the last 15 years, during the time in office, 15 years. And I got it. I said, I get this. You got to first figure out where the revenue is coming from, and once you have that, then you figure out how you're going to apportion that equitably to the districts, not only you see here, but throughout the state.
And Senator, it's not only a revenue issue, although that's the most important part of this conversation, but it's also an expense issue as well. I don't think Albany has engaged in an exercise where together we determine what does it cost to educate a student in New York State. So, you know, because we are all in different places as it relates to that. However, there are very specific elements that must be included in the education of a child, and I don't believe that New York State has ever participated in an exercise such as that one. So not only can I not predict my revenue, nor can I predict how much I will expend in my district until all the numbers are in.
So a quick follow-up to that. So from your perspective, the foundation per pupil number, do you have a sense of what that number should be? Obviously, we understand that maybe it's inadequate, but is that, do we know what that number is?
Well, it's $8,000 for Yonkers right now, that's all it is. And the cost to educate...
No, what it should be, not what it, no. You know what you're getting. I'm saying, what is the ideal cost to educate a student in the state of New York? What's that number be?
The issue is that
Because then we can back into how we get there.
the issue is that the assumption that are made as it relates to the local share also have significant flaws in it. So we also need to address that as well. Because what I'm able to afford today is not what my municipality is able to afford.
Right, but leaving out, I'm sorry, leaving out what you can afford. Let's just let's live in utopia for a second. Leaving out what you can afford. What's the ideal number that those who educate our students believe it should be? So we should be aiming to have foundation aid per pupil of X.
From an aid perspective or from a foundation aid perspective?
Foundation aid perspective.
Because not cost per pupil.
Yes, that's right.
Cost per pupil is substantially more than what foundation aid can handle right now. You know, if you want to talk somewhere in the $20,000 to $30,000 range per pupil per year, depending upon the district.
Yep.
And the child.
And also the child, because some of those children certainly exceed that.
Right, so that becomes right. So that right.
So, but as far as the predictability piece, going back to exactly what you were saying, while there may be some knowledge base of what the formula could or couldn't do, I don't believe it until April 1st hits, because the feeling at least is that it's always tinkered. Whether it is or isn't, it just feels that way. So using any formula that could or couldn't be calculated is kind of a exercise in futility.
But I guess there are two specifics on this. So English language learners, you know, and we've met, you know, in Austin, we've had this perfect storm of enrollment increase, poverty increase, English language learner increase. We've met with the state, you know, the governor's office, education secretary on many fronts. English language learners is such a watered down element of the formula at the end of the day. So you're getting essentially, some districts are getting what you get for textbooks for English language learners. And the costs to educate students that come here with interrupted education, you're getting more, it's like a special education cost. So if you take that foundational amount and you say $6,600 to start, you know, and then you add on and change that for time and local things, you're putting in such a small sliver for English language learners and such a small sliver for students in poverty. Those two factors get so watered down in the formula. For most districts in this room, going through state aid is like a lottery. I go this tier, I go this tier, I go this tier. Which one helps me? Those two kick out, and you're better off not even putting in those numbers because something else is going to give you more. And that's the travesty, right? We have to look at those two things and say, what are the real costs around it?
Samantha?
Okay, so the fact that, thank you, that's Samantha. Part of the problem is nobody can really identify what that cost specifically is without conducting a cost study, right? So that's where you've got to start. You've got to start by conducting the cost study to see what it is. I would also say that if we, and don't shoot me, if we start by allocating at least $1.1 billion for the next 3 years and see if that actually does it for us, that might be helpful.
So I'm going to switch gears and pass to Shelley. One of the things that the leader said as I'm chair of the Budget and Revenues Committee, one of the things that would be helpful if anyone has any ideas you can share now or to me afterwards with revenue ideas. I've heard a number of ideas around individual taxes, right? So we're very knowledgeable in a range of ways to deal with that.
Do they include progressive taxes?
Individual progressive tax. Well, you're talking about taxing individuals more. We're very familiar with those. The question is, are there other revenue ideas that might be that you might be aware of that you think might be interesting in this room? Joseph?
And I don't want anyone to fall out of their chair. We're having a courageous conversation. And again, I want to thank you for even allowing us to talk about these types of things. But I'm actually going to borrow from ideas that already exist and they may be aware of in the comptroller's report. The idea of doing away with property tax exempt land is one that immediately, and by the way, school districts as well, would immediately generate revenue. And do so, again, understanding or sharing the burden of the taxpayer with everybody in our community, our statewide community. I recognize that might not necessarily be popular, but neither are increasing property taxes on one's home. So, you know, in terms of looking at sort of the big picture, that could be an area that could be explored. And by the way, I don't expect anybody to answer any of these questions. The other would be the complete removal of unfunded mandates. School districts throughout the state of New York are required to ensure the health, safety, and well-being and educational progress of our children. That's what we do. We're licensed to do it. There are many mandates that are in place that are redundant or have unintended consequences that incur costs just in terms of the compliance aspect. This is something that we could actually look at. There's a no harm, no foul type of a situation here, and could save districts money. And I think we definitely need to fund the formula as it is right now, because I think the question in the interim, phased in, maybe over 3 years, in the interim, we need to make sure that we understand where we're at, and so we have a better sense of how much does it cost, right, on the average, to provide for a high-quality education for our kids. So, I mean, these are just some of the ideas that we're kicking around. The other, of course, is a progressive income tax rather than a property tax situation. And that, I know, and again, I think the Comptroller's Office even looked at this. I know there's no formula out there right now for how we would do that, but there's a lot of folks on Wall Street who could figure out a lot of programs really, really quick that never existed before. You know, if anybody can do it, we can.
Hi, Mayor. Just a couple of points. Like, to figure out how much it costs to educate a child in a public school district, you take the budget, divide it by the number of kids in it, and you'll get that figure. If you're asking us about, would we like to, certain changes we could make to figure out what that would look like differently, that's another conversation. So, right. Gotcha. So in the foundation aid formula, there's an assumption made somewhere up in Albany as to what the set amount is, like it's either $6,400 or $6,500, and then all kinds of calculations based on the tiers go either direction. So you could have some districts with barely 1,000 at the end of it, and some with close to 20,000 at the other side of it all. The point Joe made about unfunded mandates really needs to be crystal clear. And I've been around, and many of you have been at the other end of my very passionate phone calls about this topic. Nice, all right? But what I will say to you is that when I read the bills and you guys do a cost now, you've never asked us. And there's a real way right out the gate, an honest conversation about what's the real cost of this bill to the public school districts. And from now on moving forward, please do not put another, because what we end up doing when we can't cover that, we end up increasing enrollment, relying on fund balance more than we should, getting dinged from the Comptroller's Office, going out, freezing budgets, I mean that respectfully, freezing budgets in November, saying no to people. We end up scrambling. We need predictability in this. So please, just not another. Ask us. We'd be more than happy to tell you what the real cost will be.
So I'm glad you asked that question. So I agree with Joe. That's been one of the things I've been pushing for years regarding tax-exempt properties. However, I think you need to start small. There should be, when I look at tax-exempt properties, maybe in some manner there should be up to a certain point. But then anything in excess a certain value, we need to take a look at to see if that should be taxable. I believe New Jersey uses that model where they're tax exempt up to a certain threshold, and then anything over that they're taxed on. The other thing in regards to revenue is give school districts a little bit more flexibility in regards to how we utilize our reserves. So you did that with the TRS reserve. I've been advocating that for years. Why do we have one for ERS but not for TRS? And you did it, and I really appreciate that. But there's another reserve that we need to start looking at in regards to the increase in health insurance that we're experiencing each year. That we should have the flexibility in regards to establishing reserves for that. We have the responsibility to forecast our budgets, and we do that. And I'm sure Comptroller Orbach can appreciate that we do budget forecasting, and both on the expense side and revenue side. But when it comes to new revenues, if the state, and again, I'm a realist, if it's not there from the state, allow us to be able to manage our unexpended monies, our surplus, if it exists, each year, by giving us more flexibility. The 4% unappropriated fund balance,
that needs to incrementally grow. You did that. It was 2%, 10, 12 years ago, and then you did 3% the year after, 4%. We're recognizing that school districts need to have that unappropriated fund balance to increase. That needs to incrementally grow again. Again, it needs to be incrementally. And that's when I go with the tax exempt properties, with the, in case with the unappropriated fund balance. Just real quickly on the TRS. Although I appreciate everything you did, the cap that you put on it is, you know, it is a larger expense than ERS. ERS doesn't have one, although there's an opinion out there by the comptroller's office that you have too much. Well, there's no law that says one way or the other. But I think we need to maybe look at TRS again, incrementally raising that cap.
I think as well, a little bit of what you're hearing is the need for predictability when it comes to budgeting. And some of that predictability, you know, healthcare costs, for instance, there are, although many districts are parts of various consortia, there's also some districts that self-insure. That kind of thing creates a great deal of potential unpredictability. That is something that the state might be able to arrange for, you know, a larger statewide consortium, for instance, if we're, again, throwing out ideas. I think that part of the problems with the pension chain increases over the last sort of several years was a little bit the total cost, but a lot of it was, again, the unpredictability. Not being able to plan for those kind of increases and changes in your budget is exceptionally difficult. I appreciate your desire to have sort of one number that says per pupil this is what it is, but I think what you're hearing is that first of all it depends on the child, it depends on the location, and there's a whole combination of fixed and variable costs when it comes to this, and a lot of what you're hearing here is that some of these mandates are creating new fixed costs that aren't necessarily, you know, sort of enrollment based, even in many cases, and that a lot of the sort of fixed costs of doing business or the step function costs of doing business, if you have to add in essentially the equivalent of a new school worth of kids. I always used to tell taxpayers is that in essence, you add one kid to a classroom, it costs you a few books. If you add the one kid that takes you over your class limit, then it's the cost of a new teacher. Then it's the cost of a new school building. And so it's very difficult because these costs are not effectively on that basis.
John?
Being from a very small set of rural schools, I think it's a dangerous assumption to try and paint a cost per student picture across the state. You know, a lot of people today talked about increases in enrollment. Well, we're experiencing declining enrollment. And with 100 less kids, it doesn't really give me the ability to reduce my cost. I have one teacher per grade level. I have one art teacher. I have one tech teacher. You know, if I reduce art, I'm eliminating a teacher, I'm eliminating art from my school. So declining enrollment isn't necessarily a way to cut costs. You know, increase enrollment, the same thing. But from a very small rural perspective, you know, that class size piece and that shrinking enrollment is a dangerous, they're dangerous waters when we look for at a statewide cost per pupil.
Margaret?
So we, a few times it was heard that equity is not defined equally across the district and school districts. So I guess if we kind of go back to the comments on how do we define equity across districts equally, and your acceptance of listening to the different superintendents and what their input is based on the Foundation A formula, if we take those two factors, and there is a defined rubric for how do we actually do that, and take a look at the 8 elements of the previous and the current Foundation A formula, what works, what doesn't work, what needs to change, what needs to add it, that will be a starting point. You're starting with the input from the different districts and what is equity to them, based on population, based on special needs, based on education, based on services that they need to provide individually. So is that, in my question, is that insurmountable data that you would have to generalize?
Well,
I think one of the things we are looking at, and we're going to work with others, is data sets that are more current. I mean, we're not talking about free and reduced lunch, but I think there's some consensus that that no longer is the appropriate way to measure student poverty in your differing districts.
Right.
Certainly in a district as urban as, let's say, Portchester, with 70% Hispanic population, the percentage of students filling out, parents filling out the form, I am confident has decreased. And plus, many districts are offering free lunch across the board without these forms. So there are data sets that we think don't work. I'm interested in hearing from people about free and reduced lunch, using 2000 census data when we are at 2019 seems like a significant problem. Those are sort of concrete things that I think would be helpful. I did want to just for a minute harken back to two things. Flexibility for school districts in addressing challenges. I'm not a fan of the word unfunded mandate because I think some are unfunded mandates and some are legitimate policy expectations from a legislative point of view. Sure. That being said, we can disagree about it. They do come with costs. My suggestion, and we started on this last year, give us some ideas where you need flexibility to push back on what are regs of SED or rules in the law, where you think, look, they're imposing on us. I think that once we had another guidance counselor, we don't need it. I think I heard that in one of my districts. Give us something that we can go back and, one, fight with SED, and if we're not successful, put in a bill and say they have to be able to grant waivers when appropriate, because not every district has to be on this one-size-fits-all model, and so we want to force SED to be flexible in their implementation. So if you give us specifics, we are, one, willing to work with our colleagues at SED, and two, if that doesn't work, try to propose something. We did some last year, and we're prepared to do more. So I just want to, that's one of the flexible things, but I know.
3 hours of required time for voting.
We know about that one. We know about that one.
Exactly, during recess.
Substantial equivalence.
I know, well, okay, without, yeah, okay.
Early voting. You got it.
Right.
October 26th.
Zakia?
Can you pass the mic down, please?
So I just wanted to share some of the recommendations that we have in our report that I just talked about, that I hope everybody will go to our website and look at. Which gets to what you were asking. So some of them include use updated data for poverty, such as direct certification data. This data is more up to date and is verified by government agencies that provide public assistance. Eliminate the restrictions in the pupils' need index in order to accurately capture student need. There is an artificial cap to the needs index that does allow accounting of severe student needs. Eliminate the floor on the income wealth index to fully capture poverty at the district level and accurately factor in the expected minimum local contribution. The floor on the income wealth index is arbitrary and penalizes districts below that floor for being too poor. At the same time, the state should eliminate the cap within the income wealth index, which underestimates wealth in the wealthier districts. The other one, the foundation aid formula factors the different costs of education in different regions in the state. The Hudson Valley region includes school districts in very high cost regions near New York City, such as Yonkers, Peekskill, and Mount Vernon. Grouping these schools with schools that are further north underestimates the regional cost for the lower Hudson Valley, which is more comparable in cost with Long Island and New York City. The lower Hudson Valley should be a distinct region for the purpose of calculating the regional cost index. And update weights in key categories in order to help district cover the true cost of education students with the greatest needs. For example, add a weighting for high concentrations of English language learners, add a weighting for students with more severe disabilities, and add a weighting for high concentrations of students in poverty.
And your report came out yesterday, yes?
This today.
Today?
Yeah, this morning.
Good timing. Edwin?
I'm just a little bit concerned because it sounds to me, and both elected officials or educators are perfect at suggesting complicated things. And what I'm hearing is another complicated algorithm that is going to hurt some of us at some level. I think this is very simple. It's a quick analysis. What is it that is required to educate a student in an urban community? What is it that is required to educate a student in a rural community, and so on and so forth, and then appropriate the funding. It is the state responsibility to educate our children. It is your responsibility. Let's make it happen. Let's not create another crazy formula. This formula doesn't work. No one understands this formula. This formula only works for some, and it leaves some behind. You know, let's get rid of this formula. And then let's say, in order for Yonkers to educate its children, Yonkers is able to afford this much. The state is responsible for this much. The end.
I think, John? Senator Luke, my apologies.
No problem. I know we're trying to hear from the roundtable, but I'm just sitting here just like getting the bug somehow. Superintendent, right? Superintendent Quezada?
Yes, sir.
So you're saying just throw out the whole formula?
Oh, I would throw it out right now.
Because it doesn't work at all.
But it's not supporting the needs
If
of
we
the
throw out
children.
the formula and come up with a group of experts, perhaps including yourself and the SED, along with our colleagues in the legislature, we get a new formula, and somehow, like amazingly, I know this could never happen, but somehow your school district wound up getting less than what the current formula calls for. Would you be okay with that?
That wouldn't happen.
Would that happen to any of you
I'm too
here?
much of a fighter to allow that to happen.
I wrote a note. It's a very good point. I wrote myself a note about 5 minutes ago about a change year has to have a major infusion of cash so that there aren't those situations. Because you're right, 100% right. Because if there is a steal from Peter to pay Paul perspective on this, every single person in this roundtable would be replaced by a different group after the new formula. So year one is major infusion of a lot of cash to right the ship and make sure no one's harmed. That is the basis of hold harmless legislation. So yeah, year one, it's going to be more costly than you would have anticipated. Yes?
But along with that,
Lisa?
but along with that, whatever happens here has to be sustainable. We heard about predictability, but there has to be sustainability here. I don't want to be sitting, even if I had to give up, which I really am going to cry if I have to give up, but even if I had to give up, if I knew that I wasn't going to have to give up again, and at the state, this was my basis. I want things built into this formula so that if things tank in this state or this country, and cyclically they do, right? Learn that in economics. We have to be able to sustain for these children that are coming up that did not have anything to do with the tanking of an economy. We have to be able to sustain what we have. Whatever that formula is, Kevin mentioned before, private excess costs, public excess costs. We had basic formula. And then the state said, we're going to give you this amount for our special ed students, if they're privately placed, publicly placed. And then if you really dig into that formula, you can see that we all had an expected contribution. It was $6,000 per year for whatever it is. It used to be 21, now it's 47. That's not sustainable, about what our contribution is. But those tiers of additional aid categories are good. If you had a category where you got, and I know we want to throw out the formula, but we're going to have to come up with another formula. There's going to have, I don't want to throw it out either. But look, we're talking about, but we're talking about modifying, throwing out.
You're not the only one.
Some there, whatever. But looking at different categories too to supplement ELL students, like we supplement special ed students. Poverty, I said it before, it's an equalizer here. Kids are coming in, maybe it's a funding pre-K for everybody, so kids come to the table equalized more coming in.
I just wanted to make the point that I think the formula does need to be nuanced. Hi, Kara, White Plains Teachers Association and teacher. I think that the formula does have to be nuanced because there are a lot of complexities. So zip code doesn't determine student need, and I think we need that flexibility in our districts to look at what we currently have while still funding foundation aid fully, and then thinking about how maybe students with disabilities are weighed or how our E&L students are weighed in the formula.
Mary, then Zakia, then Michael, then Ray.
So just from a technical level, the weightings of, because the PNI, the Pupil Needs Index, ELLs and students with disabilities. But the other piece too is I want to go back to that combined wealth ratio formula, which speaks about the expected local contribution. So I will say that that expected local contribution is very different in many communities across this amazing state. We have a city in our state that is as big as some European nations. And I'm a child of immigrants who moved into Bronx and then Queens, and I love New York City. It is incredibly complex and complicated. But there are some homeowners who might live in Staten Island and the Bronx who are paying more in property taxes than those that might live in a very wealthy brownstone or a very wealthy. And I know you know that, but I also need to think the city is filled with a booming population and growing student needs. So that's a very complex thing to look at. And to all my colleagues throughout the rest of the state, let's be real. The city of New York and its surrounding suburbs is the cost driver for money for the rest of the state. So to kind of wrap your hands around all of that and figure that out. But I will say on another level that disparity in expected local contribution about property tax in the city is something that needs to be looked at.
Zakia?
Yeah, so one thing. One is that we know in its initial CFE, the $1 billion+ that you talked about, we know the impact. We know how it is to flush the system with enough money so that we don't have dribs and drabs, that we can actually, you as educators and superintendents, and we as parents and young people that sit in our schools can have access to a flourishing education. And I would say that the ceiling is not a sound basic education. For me as a parent, the ceiling is a high quality education for every child, right? So we need to make sure that that's all our ceiling is, a high quality, not a sound basic education. Two, the fact that we are talking about as if the Foundation Aid was ever used. It has not been used. And so I respectfully ask folks to constantly think about that. We haven't used it and we haven't funded it. Number three, I would say that this narrative, even conversation about a shifting, undoing, falls into, and I'm going to say it, the narrative of a governor who didn't want to fund it in the first place to now allow him to say, see, we need to change this. We need to figure this out and what this looks like. And at the end of the day, if we're not doing, I say it again, if we haven't done it, we haven't used it, and we haven't funded it, the track record shows that we change it and we shift it. We don't change the mindset and say equity has to be centered. Those 30 children, we're seeing them in the center of the room that was shared. And at the same time, how are we making sure that the revenue is real? Like, I get it. It's a political conversation. Even the way we're not using it and we're shifting it and making a different thing, calling it foundation, is political. Right? So while we don't want to talk about politics, we can't ignore it in education. It is what it is in this moment right now. And all those key components, I just want to keep coming back to the fact we're not using it now. We haven't used it in years, and we're not funding it now. So when we talk about getting rid of it or changing it, there's no doubt in my mind that things have changed, populations have grown, all of that. But to abandon a commitment that was created by one of these parents sitting in this room who is currently a senator, to allow the decade more or plus of not really funding or using the formula is a disgrace on the state that we have allowed children to graduate out of our schools and we have yet to fulfill that, but we want to move on. We can't move on. Like, that's history, right? And so how do we make sure that we are pulling all these things together and constantly, I just want us to have that narrative that we have not used it and we have not funded it.
Michael, then Ray.
I can back up what you just said, too, with some real numbers, not with the purpose of starting a steel cage grudge match with two of my friends next door, but Kevin and I happen to have school districts that abut each other, right next to each other, and Lisa and I, we all attend similar meetings in our region. If the formula was applied, actually, I'm sorry, as we sit right now, Marlboro is funded at 59% of the budget, of the funding formula. Walk Hill is funded at 96%, and Ellenville is funded at 82%. I can't explain that to my taxpayers. And that's not to say that I should be taking money from Kevin or taking money from Lisa. But there's the evidence that there's a problem. We're right next to each other, and people in our area would say Walk Hill, Marlboro,
both high-quality, good school districts, right next to each other. Where's the disparity? The real money. Kevin's short by $945,000 to get to 100% funding. Marlboro's $5.4 million. I mean, there's the issue.
Ray.
You are a much richer district.
There's the answer.
So I think we're in full agreement if we had to raise hands that equity matters. And I just want to add a layer, particularly as you talked about where we're finding the money. Sometimes we can create the formula and make it an equitable, fair formula, but I'd encourage us to continue to look at the shares component to this. I'll go back to an article that Susan Arbiter wrote in 1998 that she notes, quote, "The inequity between districts is exacerbated by another calculation that informs how much school districts in specific regions receive from the state. The so-called shares agreement is less a formula and more a geopolitical gentleman's agreement. When you have 38% of the funding, whatever you determine, to go to New York City, and another 12%, 13% going to Long Island, I think in the context of opening everything up and having a fair conversation about equitable funding across the state, that too needs to be determined and looked at really, really carefully. So no matter what pot you put in there, you're already saying, irrespective of the formula, 50% is going to go to those two regions. And I think that adds a layer to the complexity of coming up with a fair, equitable formula. If on top of that, you're adding a layer that says 50% of it is going to go to two regions, with what she would call not necessarily a fair and honest reason for why it was done in the early 80s.
Thank you all. Senator Harkin has a question.
Yeah, Thank you, Senator Benjamin, for indulging me. This has been really interesting because I'm hearing, let's not change, let's stay with the formula because we never did it, and then we're hearing all kinds of permutations of changes that we need to make in the formula, and at every juncture, everyone is saying, we don't want to harm other districts. We need more resources, and it's all coming down to resources. And I know we're not here to talk about resources today. We're here to talk about the formula, but that keeps creeping in. And so the question I have for all of you is, you all have constituencies the way we have constituencies. And my guess is you've heard from those constituencies about how the loss of SALT deductions is impacted the ability of our property owners to pay taxes. But what we're talking about here are taxes. So whether it's a property tax or an income tax on the state level, do you believe that your constituencies would be okay with what would need to be a sizable income tax increase in order to do the kinds of things and move the ball the way we need to move it? And that's just as was said, a plain and simple political calculation, but it's as much about our values and what we want to invest in, but theoretically, and not theoretically, practicality-wise, what people can afford to pay.
Joseph?
Thank you, Senator. I think it's a great question. And I think first of all, as taxpayer, everybody sitting in the room, that's a question that probably, we would all be thinking about. I think what we need to do is we need to find additional sources of revenue or change the pattern of spending the way it is right now in order to offset any potential tax increase that we're talking about. I mean, there needs to be a balanced approach. It doesn't, I think one of the challenges that you face, and I don't envy you, is that, when we're talking about this big of an issue, the primary driver in the state budget, the future of the state of New York, that's what we're talking about here when we talk about these children that, the future taxpayers. The way it's constructed right now is unsustainable. Right. We know that. Right. It's agreed upon, which means that we're going to need to take some drastic steps in the way in which we're doing business right now to create a sustainable system, a more predictable system, a more equitable system to achieve what we want to achieve in 1920 forward. So I think it's not going to be necessarily just, a blanket tax increase. It can't be, because no one would agree to that. It's unsustainable. It would put people out of their homes. we're going to have to figure out new ways to infuse revenue into the budget and infuse revenue into the process. And I think that's going to be looking at some vestiges of the past that are no longer sustainable. Can we have properties in the state of New York that don't pay taxes? I think it's a fair question.
Any other comments?
I think, you know, in a small district like Pleasantville, we don't have big business. So to give a size, to ask the homeowners who are already overtaxed, for many of us, how can we possibly ask them to pay more when we're paying so much on healthcare and other things? You have to find other sources of revenue, whether it's adding more taxes, a sales tax onto internet sales. You know, we just had Westchester County increase their sales tax, and that's bringing in a new source of revenue. You know, a small 1% on something like retail can bring in some money, but to put it back on the homeowners, you can't. I think it's unsustainable.
So,
Just a brief interruption, and I really don't want to be exclusively in a revenue conversation. I also want to acknowledge County Legislator Chris Johnson, who was just here with his baby, next generation of student. Just on revenue, and because we started down this path, and I, again, caution us, it's a conversation worth having, and we have to have it. I do think it's important to get your input on particular measurements, so let me just put that out there. We could get, this happened the last year, we argued with the governor about ways to find more revenue, including expanded gaming, which obviously is important to us here in Westchester. He had a self-imposed spending cap, which is not legislative, which, from his perspective, limited how much more he was willing to put into education if we found revenue. So while I think having a revenue conversation is useful and valuable, and we are interested in creative ideas, we should be mindful that we need a three-way deal to get a budget, and he has been quite committed to this spending cap. So yes, we need to talk about revenue, and yes, we're going to make our arguments, but at the same time, don't lose this opportunity to tell us what is wrong in the calculation. Notwithstanding to your point that it hasn't been used, and I'm not for throwing it out. I'm for saying make it work. And I don't think the measurements in there work, whether it's free and reduced lunch, whether it's the waiting for ELLs, which I really think we haven't discussed enough and that we could use your input. Special needs students is a big cost driver that wasn't anticipated and shouldn't be thrown out. So I just want to put both those things on the table. The revenue is a challenge because of the spending cap.
Samantha? So I was going to comment on revenue, but I'm not going to now. In taking a look at what it costs to educate students, we have to first also take a look at the years and years that we have spent cutting programs to our students, cutting services to our students because of the lack of funding. So I think the question is, what is it going to cost to bring us to an equal playing field? And then what does it cost beyond that? So when we talk about flexibility, and I hear that a lot, the concern I have with that word is, let us not look at flexibility that harms students. We have students with special needs whose programs determine what it takes for them to be successful, and yet we exceed those class size limits for those students. And in the elementary level, there's no cap to the amount of extra students you can put in a class. And at the secondary level, the cap is 20%. So when you take a child who is severely autistic, that we have deemed, that the government has deemed a class size of 8 students to multiple adults to be an equalizer for them. And yet, we have students above that amount, 10, 12. and on and on and on, right? Because there's no cap at the elementary level. What is it going to cost to allow that child to be successful first? Then take a look at the number of students that are entering who also have needs, and how are we going to calculate that? Now add on to that a student who does not speak the language. Now you're adding to that cost, right? A child with special needs who also does not speak English. You're compounding the cost at that point. On top of that, that child doesn't get a meal until the child comes to school. What does that cost? So I think it's a larger question. I think it's a complicated question. And that you have to be able to take into account the district's needs, the socioeconomic needs, the social emotional needs of those children. That is our responsibility, and I'm glad that we are here to address that. But it is not a simple answer, my friends. Not as simple as putting a dollar sign, because God help me, a dollar sign is not going to satisfy me as a parent, as a teacher, as a citizen, until every need is met.
With all due respect.
And when we have schools that don't even have libraries. Could you imagine a school with no library? And we're talking to friends here. This is not an attack, okay? I want to be very clear about that. Each and every one of you has opened your doors to us whenever any of us have come to you to discuss this issue. It is because you have a passion to address this issue that you are here, that we are here together. Just want to make sure that the numbers are real, okay? Take into account all of the different things that we need.
Senator Liu.
I mean, I'm just saying, I totally agree with everything you said, but the formula already accounts for every one of those things you talked about. Meaning the .65 should be tweaked, the .5 should be tweaked?
It's not funded though.
How much money does it kick out? I mean, this is where I'll say, down from the story. It's around $1.
All right, so the issue is that we need to put more money in. Not that none of those things are being accounted for, because they are in the formula.
While funding it, analyze what needs to change.
But while we're making a change, please fund it, is what I'm saying.
Walter, I apologize.
It's, as you mentioned before, it's very difficult to change the formula because there are so many mathematical formulas there that when you change one variable, other will have a domino effect. That needs a little bit more time to study what to change. The easy part is there is a remaining of foundation aid that it's still holding for every district. As I mentioned before, the size for our district is $24 million. We're funded at 60%. Some are, I've heard, at 51%, 95%. The next thing is what are the trends in the last 20 years in our state? You see 3 trends. The poverty has been redistributed. If you look at the poverty data for kids from 5-year-old to 17-year-old in 1999, the state, and compare it to today, the state poverty rate has gone down by 1%. From 18% today, it is 17%. Yet, if you go district by district, you see huge disparities. So that needs to be looked at. Our district, it's, as I mentioned before, was 29% in 1999. We are 37%. And it's hard to find another district, mid-Hudson and below, that has this ratio. So that something needs to be done there. The foundation aid formula calculates in one way. I would say, okay, I don't have enough data to assess that, the special aid needs. There is a specialist student in foundation aid takes a rating of more than 1. So you count one student, general ed is a 1, a special ed is counted 1.4, 1.5, depending on what it is. Can this be done for English new language learners? So I'm saying it's just an idea. I don't have that, but that addresses the trend of increase on the English new language learners, and that increase is also disparate in terms of distribution. Now, does it mean that you have to take from another district, as Mr. Evans mentioned before? There are economies of scale. If you have small districts, you have no choices. You have 20 kids, you'll have to have a teacher there. If you cut the funding for that specific district, you're cutting the funding for that class. There's no teacher there. It's not that you have 100 teachers and you can play, I'm going to have 99. So in this point, I think there could be a mixture of redistributing as well as adding. But to do that, it needs a little bit more time. I think poverty, English new language learners, and special ed are three trends that have happened in the last 20 years based on the data. And yes, the state looks like poverty for kids 5 to 17-year-old has gone down. It's a little bit interesting, but that's what it is.
Senator Scoofus.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to make just a few admittedly disparate points listening to everyone, and I agree with much of what's been said, but just to throw it out there and perhaps it provokes a conversation, even if it doesn't, I think it's worth noting. So first, and it's been mentioned a couple times, I think that really probably the least objectionable thing that I think we could do in the next session is simply bring 2 data points up to current sort of 2019 levels. Poverty 2000, we're about to be starting the 2020 census in a short period, and we're using 2000 level poverty numbers, which I can't imagine any public policy rationale by which we would choose not to update that number for trying to look at what the poverty is in a school district. And the regional cost index is from 2006. And you know, these are items that we wouldn't even have to spend effort or resources to get that data. It's already out there, studied by the federal government. So you know, I think that's something that we should just correct, but perhaps put in statute that every 10 years we automatically use the next census data that comes in, as opposed to having to have a fight every decade. A couple of other things, not-for-profits and properties that are off the tax rolls have been mentioned a couple times. I recognize this isn't a school district, but I want to provide an example that's certainly a taxing jurisdiction that is very timely. It's the city of Newburgh, which I represent, came out with their the city manager's proposed budget literally last night. And keep in mind, we're in what most would consider a strong economy, right? We're certainly not in a recession. And in 2019, the proposed budget lays off 14% of their police department, 16% of their fire department, and increases property taxes 20%, despite that. And so the city manager put up a map of the city of Newburgh and shaded in the various types of properties that are in the municipality. And red was properties that were off the tax rolls, owned by a private entity, so not municipal property. And the city of Newburgh is awash in red. And so I think there at least needs to be a conversation about this issue, and I believe we have, if not the highest, one of the very highest not-for-profits per capita in the United States. Quite frankly, I don't think it's even close once you get past the first few, us, California, Texas. And then I'll make 2 parochial, I'm a very parochial representative, which drives my colleagues crazy sometimes, but I'll make 2 parochial points, and then I'll be done, that I think are important. First, shares have been brought up, and when I first learned about shares, I was in the Assembly for 6 years before starting in the Senate this year. It seemed very strange to me, and it seemed like a pretty blatant political arrangement. But let's also be careful what we wish for if we talk about doing away with shares. Did some quick math. Long Island in New York City, which is in the focus of the shares conversation, is 11 million people out of the 19.5 million people in New York State. That's 56% of the population. Their share is 51% of the population. So before we start talking about like undoing shares, just be careful, Hudson Valley. And the second thing I'll mention, parochial item, is the Senate district I represent is bookended by power plant issues. At the very northern tip of the Senate district in Marlborough, as we mentioned before and described before, they've been through a crisis. There are ongoing challenges with a pending proposal for a new power plant. And on this very southern end of the district I represent is North Rockland, where you have the largest tax certiorari in New York State history, I believe. Literally $11.5 million every year is paid to Marant out of the North Rockland Central School District over the course of 30 years, annual payment for a tax cert. And they had a closure as well, in addition to the peaker plant tax certiorari. And so the formula, if we're talking about trying to make it reflective of what's going on in communities, we passed a climate change bill that is going to close many generators over the next 20 years throughout the state. There needs to be some consideration of the enormous tax implications that these generator closures are having in local communities. Indian Point is certainly the next one on the horizon, but there are going to be many, many others. And if we're going to look at tinkering this formula or making wholesale changes, I hope that's considered.
Okay, so I thought Karen was first, then Lisa, and Frank, then
I absolutely appreciate your point about, at the very least, a little updated data would be a good start to the process. I think a little bit of what you're hearing here is, yes, let's start by updating the data, but also let's take a look at what actually makes sense for us in New York State and in this region, obviously in this room, but nonetheless in New York State generally. Free and reduced price lunch is essentially based on the federal poverty measure, right? And that is, just because a certain amount makes you poor in, Mississippi doesn't make you poor in New York State and vice versa. So there are other things that can be looked into. The United Way's ALICE measure, asset limited, income constrained and employed, basically takes a look at a household budget on a much more specific regional basis and says for a family of four, this is what it actually costs nowadays to live. And so there's other options available for the long term. I totally agree with you. At the very least, let's update the numbers. I think that obviously the regional cost has come up many times, and the last, as far as I know, the last time the regions took a look at the regional cost index, even though it was not incorporated into the formula, was 2012. My hope is that something that could be fairly reasonably, quickly updated, but at the very least, 2012 numbers are better than 2006. I think that we really need to look, and this has come up many times, Mary Alter brought it up several times, is the combined wealth index is a problematic factor. It basically assumes that the average wealth in a district, which many of us have small districts with very wide range of both income and property wealth disparity. So just as she said, she doesn't want somebody who just, won the lottery to move into her district. None of us want Bill Gates. None of us want, which are people that we should want to have in our neighborhoods. So let's, taking a look at that and the potential for at the very least some kind of a median value would at least essentially means assume that it's a normal distribution. We all know that incomes and property wealth are not a normal distribution. So let's not pretend that that's the case and take a look at something that makes sense. I think that the bigger problem with using the wealth index, especially when it constitutes a lot of property wealth in there, as a measure of a community's ability to pay, really the problem is the ability of a school district to tax. And that is where we get into issues around the SALT deduction, which is a huge issue in Westchester that has very high property taxes. That's where we get into the fact that incomes have not risen as fast as property values have. So that's where you have to pay your property taxes out of your income. It's not out of the wealth that's in the land that you happen to own. So really taking a look at the piece of the puzzle that says, yes, there should be an expected contribution, of course, from in any logical formula, from the local
property taxpayers or the local taxpayers, but let's take a look at what makes sense and really reflects the ability of the local community to pay and the ability of the local school district to tax. Because unfortunately, what you said in terms of Senator Liu, in terms of, there's always winners and losers in any kind of a reworking of the formula or even in updating the numbers in a formula. None of us want to be on the losing end, but given the only other source of revenue is property taxes, and between the SALT deduction, between the tax levy cap limits, and essentially some, taxpayer revolt going on and lack of income growth, that is not something that school districts have an excessive ability to increase their tax base.
Well, I mean, there's more than property tax, right? Senator Larkin talked about, I'm sorry, I'm going to put this on you.
I don't want you to
mind
me saying
Harkin calls for massive tax. That's not the headline here. Stop while you're ahead.
So let me just point out to everyone that we do have a 2 p.m. hard stop, so I'd like to prioritize anyone who has not spoken as of yet, but in lieu of that, I will just follow those whose hands are raised. Lisa.
Thank you. So just a question, I understand that we should all be using the most recent data, that's available. I'm just a question, what happens when that data generates actually more foundation aid that I would be entitled to in Eastchester? What are we going to do about it then when we update all these factors and, oh, now my deficit just went from 4.2 million to 5 million, and I'm still not getting funded for it, so I'm just putting that out there. But, I understand it's a revenue stream, and I'm the business official. I understand too, I have limited revenue. There are only so many pockets I can pick. I get that. So I think, if the message we're getting is we would like to revisit this, however, funding it is still going to be the big elephant in the room. We don't know how we're going to get it funded. Then I think in terms of school district finance and management, let's look at the other side of the equation, the expenditures that perhaps we could use assistance with. One of my big things, tax certiorari's refunds. Last year, Eastchester, I think it was last year, my years blend together, paid out $1.6 million in tax certiorari refunds for several years worth of tax certiorari's. $1.6 million in tax certs is the same thing to me as getting $1.6 million in state aid. If I didn't have to pay out those tax certiorari's, that's money that students in Eastchester could use. I understand that there's a constituency out there for everything. We have huge transportation mandates as well, that maybe that's something worth being looked at in terms of, if you can't give me the revenue, reduce my costs. More flexibility. So in speaking of flexibility, use of reserves. I'm very limited in my ability to either create reserves or use reserves. If I have reserves I want to use, I've got to funnel it through the tax cap calculation, which is just a complete disincentive for me to do that because it's going to impact my levy next year, which is now capped. Right. So it's kind of like by all the mandates that have been put on us in terms of reserves, in terms of, you've made us more reliant on state aid because I can't finance things the way I think the district should be financed. So now I'm coming to you and saying, if I can't raise taxes, if I can't use my reserves, if I can't do this, I need you to help me. And you're telling me we can't help you, right? We can't fund it. There's only a, So I think if it's a bigger picture conversation, it's not just about state aid. It's about how school districts are able to financially manage themselves if the state cannot help give us more flexibility to do what we can do. Because if I put something in reserve, if I have a surplus one year, and if I can put it in a reserve and maybe put it in my piggy bank to pay for something unexpected next year, that's helpful to me, but I can't do that right now because of all the other things that are kind of stopping me from doing that. So I'd be happy to have a bigger conversation even than state aid about, let's talk about other things that you can do to help school districts sustain themselves financially.
Do you often have money left over?
Sometimes I do, sure.
Senator Little.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone. It's been really very interesting. I happen to represent the Adirondack Park, which I hope all of you have had a chance to go to, since it's one of the most beautiful places in the state, in the country. However, it's 6 million acres, 3 million acres are forest preserve land, which you cannot even remove a tree from that property, even if it falls down. You have to leave it there. We are not growing. I have small school districts, and I will tell you, when people talk about the hold harmless provision, that we need to get rid of it, it just sends me up the wall. Because if you only have 6 students in a class, that teacher costs the same, as does the insurance, as does all of the costs of running the building, and all the other things that go on. And yet, if you have 25 students in your class, the teacher costs the same, but you're getting money for those 25 students, so you're still ahead. We are behind. We have an aging population. The Adirondack Park population is aging faster than there's one county in Florida that's got a lot of old people, but we're right with them. So our future, I have 2 schools that have just merged and formed a new school district. It's difficult. I have 3 villages that have dissolved. So we're doing a lot of things that we can, but one of the things about the small school districts, many of them have more retired teachers than they have active duty. So their legacy costs are enormous too. So please remember that when you get to talking about hold harmless, because these schools are far apart too. You're going to talk about kids being on a bus. It takes them sometimes 45 minutes to get to the school, and then you want to start moving them to another school. So we would better have busing classrooms. But thank you very much. I think that, what I'm taking away is that if the data were up to date, the formula might work better. And if we find a better measure of the poverty, because a lot of my schools did go into that community federal program with the free lunch and breakfast, so their free and reduced lunch numbers have gone way down. So, but thank you very much. I really enjoyed being here.
Just very briefly, so, I've heard loud and clear across the room, keeping the whole market position in place and not taking away from one district to pay the other. That's not, earth-shattering to any of us. What I want to make sure, though, is heard is that there's a small number of districts in the state, less than 5%, that have been harmed over the last decade because their enrollments have grown to tremendous amounts. East Roundtable, Yonkers, Portchester, Austin, over Peekskill. Overwhelmingly, these districts are districts of color. And a lot of the things that you're talking about is saying we don't have is because we've not been held harmless. We've been held back while that money's continued to flow. And so the worst distortion of that story is there's districts out there with twice the wealth of Austin and a fraction of the students of color and a fraction of the students with needs, and they're getting $4,400 a student to our $2,500. So this holding these districts back for the past decade, and I started this off today by saying don't forget about the last 10 years because we've been going along. We've added, Portchester and Austin added a high school essentially. Yonkers added another school district. These are tremendous amounts of students, and that foundational amount, that 6,600 is so key to that. So as we're talking about hold harmless, let's also talk about those harm districts because they need to be brought up. And if you're looking at a pocket of money where you're trying to do this, there needs to be some correction for those 30 districts in the state.
David?
I think that was the harm 5. Talk to Dr. Sanchez if we can add Peekskill to harm 6 to that. But this is my second year as a superintendent, and I just want to say this has been very educational for me to learn more about the formula. And I may know less now because there's so many variables to it. But what I did want to share is I want us to be mindful of the English language learners and their needs. And so, as I shared, we have 21% English language learners in our district, but of our new welcomed but unanticipated number of students, 36% of them are immigrants and English language learners. And so, with that, as we look at the formula, allocation for E&L students, I just wanted you to think about and make sure that we have these categories represented in that allocation. One is obviously E&L teachers or ESL teachers, as you may have known them, but there's also a higher need of trauma that we are seeing in our students and in the families, and that's requiring social workers and counselors to be supportive of them, and we're under-resourced in that area. Homelessness, and not the typical homelessness that, and I grew up in New York City, so when I heard the term homeless, I thought of a person living under, without a house under a bridge. But what we're seeing is 3 and 4 families coupled up in a home. And that in itself may or may not bring trauma, but it brings needs and aspects to that child that are very important for us to think about. Literacy, after-school programs, summer programming is critically important. And then one area we may often forget about is that parent engagement support and that parent education support to help our families who may be working 2 and 3 jobs, but help them to understand the importance of literacy from pre-K, from birth to pre-K, but also how to support their children in homework help and engagement opportunities for them. And so as we think about it, and I'm sure I've missed some, but as we think about that formula for E&L students, if we could take a broader look at the needs that we have for those students, I just wanted to make sure I shared that with you today.
Thank you. Senator Metzger.
Thank you. This has been a really valuable conversation. I just want to point out that one of the themes are there are very real differences in the challenges that our school districts face, even just regionally. We have some that are growing with populations that are more costly to educate, and we have others that are shrinking at a rapid rate, and that brings its own additional costs. And there are just differences in the types of costs. In rural areas, transportation is an insane cost, and it's going to keep going up over time, especially as we're trying to move away from fossil fuels. These are real issues that we have to think about. And when we're looking at foundation aid, we're looking at this, I think we have to consider these geographic differences. It's not one size fits all. I really appreciated the point that I'm not sure which of you brought it up on that side of the room, but about universal pre-K. And there are certain investments that we can make that actually lower costs later on. And I think we have to think about that too, where we're putting the money, where we are going to invest to really make the biggest difference we can make. So I want to thank you all for being here, and thank you.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you. Also, more of a closing. I learned so much from all of you today. I'm not convinced we actually do want to change the formula, although I want more transparency, and I don't know we need 42 variations within each category, so thank you for that education. But I also think it's really clear from all of you, the databases that we're using to determine the parts of our formula are just fundamentally flawed. And I'm absolutely sure that we can, with the agreement of the governor and the assembly, actually come up with better models of using correct data that, if applied, would make for a more equitable education formula. I just want to highlight 2 other things I heard. People talk all the time about the unfunded mandates. I've been there 18 years. Somebody give me a list of the unfunded mandates.
Oh, we have them.
And talk
We have them.
about
We have
specifics, and that we can individually evaluate why you might think it's unfunded mandate, and I think it's a fundamental health and safety issue. But at least we could then have that conversation. And also, I think it was also you, I'm not sure, the argument, maybe somebody else, I apologize, so many people said such good things. When we in Albany sit there and pass a bill that we claim has no state cost, or we had put it in the budget and say it has no state cost because the cost is on you, the school district, we absolutely should be responsible to get that information and have that public within our bills. If you ever take a look at our bills, it says your estimated cost to the state it doesn't say estimated cost of the locality or the school district. And so if we are going to, as elected officials, hand you new responsibilities and perhaps new costs, we at least ought to put it down in writing before we're actually voting for it, so that we all know, today we made the decision that we're gonna make schools do X, and it's going to cost Y, and ultimately, somebody's gonna have to damn pay for it. So I really appreciated the highlight of that, because that's actually been one of my pet peeves for 18 years in all of And I want to thank Shelley for her incredible work on this, and Andrea for telling us when we took over, we're going to address these third rail issues that are going to be really hard, and we're going to piss off some people, and we're going to have to fight really hard. But she said, get in there and do that. And I think that is the greatest achievement perhaps of the first year of the Senate Democrats, that we're actually thinking that's our work assignment. So thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you for coming to Yonkers. I mean, what a great experience together. You have to understand that if we are not going to throw away the Foundation Aid formula, because you don't agree, even though I firmly believe that it should be thrown out, because after 4 hours of discussion, do understand that in 2007, 2008, the state recognized that the Foundation Aid formula did not work, because at that point for Yonkers, they created a supplemental educational improvement plan grant. Because on that same year, the state said this formula doesn't work. So I still don't understand why are we keeping an algorithm that doesn't work. And I would urge us all not to do it next year, but in subsequent years, let's get rid of this instrument because it doesn't work. However, because we are not able to eliminate this instrument at this point, there are other ways that you can help us. And I think you guys have said some of them. So fully fund pre-K for all of us. Increase community school money. You know, that brings more money. Increase transportation reimbursement. Increase building aid reimbursement. Pay for some of the pass-through expenses. I won't mention any of them right now, but you know exactly what they are. Why am I paying for them? You pay for them. You guys created them, you pay for them. So there are other things that you are able to help us right now without touching Foundation Aid that will help all of the municipality. Remember, in Yonkers, we are part of the Big Fives. We educate close to 50% of all New York children. We have 50% of all multilingual learners. We have over 50% of all students with disabilities. Although I love all my friends here, we are a different animal. And even when you sit us together, the 5 superintendents from the districts, we all disagree on the formula because some are getting more than others. This instrument just doesn't work.
Man? You have a mic?
I have a lot of voice. So I just wanted to thank everyone for sharing their perspectives today. It's tremendously helpful for us, thank you, to hear color regionally. The one thing I wanted to offer is that, you know, we've been having internal discussions, of course, and we've met with state-level organizations throughout the course of the last couple of years. In terms of what we've heard today, especially with regard to the regional cost index and some other components, that work had been done initially by the Board of Regents back in the mid-2000s as the formula was being developed. We could be poised to develop a proposal to work with you on updating those components again. So I just wanted to leave you with that.
Thank you.
Shelley Mayer to close us out.
So I want to thank you, and I do think one of the values of this is that we're all in our own districts, and I have, you know, like many of us, multiple districts, and I'm happy that Eastchester and Portchester are here with Yonkers. But we do get to hear each other's issues, and we have different district issues. This is very much a message of today. There's not a one-size-fits-all for all of us, and I think one of the values of hearing it at a regional level to the regents is that the statewide perspective is at a different level than what we hear right here, what happens to students. So I want to thank you all for taking the time. I think this was very valuable. Like it was said by, I think, Senator Kruger, we were allowed to open the door and allow conversation to occur. When conversation occurs, everybody's not on the same page. That's okay, we're all grown-ups. We're going to take and use what we can to move the needle ahead. And we are going to need your help. in doing that, in dealing with our colleagues in the assembly, who generally tend to be on a similar page. But we have challenges to get the governor to come along with us. We did last year. We're going to need your continued help. So we look forward to coming back to you at the end of this process, our 5 roundtables and our hearing, with some real concrete suggestions that hopefully reflect some of what you said. Thank you all for taking the time and making.
Thank you.